Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly into a place you probably shouldn't be walking through alone. A place where the streets are empty, the air smells faintly of rain and coal dust, and the lanterns glow even though no one seems to live here anymore. You see them swaying, one by one, throwing pale amber patches across crooked cobblestones, and you feel that little chill that tells you somebody hung them recently. But the town is silent. Not a cart rolling, not a dog barking, just you and those lights, watching like tired eyes. And yes, here comes the reality check. You probably won't survive this stroll if you get too curious. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward into the first lane, your shoes brushing over uneven stones polished by centuries of feet. Each lamp flickers against the fog that clings to the houses, small, timber-framed places leaning inward like gossiping old neighbors. Their shutters are closed, their doors barred, yet each window has lace curtains that twitch when you're not looking straight at them. You sense them, don't you? That odd little stir as though somebody just ducked out of sight. The lanterns themselves are odd. Wrought iron frames, glass panes smeared with smoke from flames that never seem to consume the wick. They shouldn't still be lit, yet here they are, humming with a faint crackle. There's a historical echo in this moment. In the late Middle Ages, small towns across Europe had night watchmen whose main job was to light and maintain lanterns along the streets. Without those flames, people would stumble through darkness thick as pitch, and crime, or worse, could flourish. But here's the twist. Your town has no watchman, no resident at all, and yet the lanterns remain alive, as though clinging stubbornly to a duty long after the people disappeared. Historians still argue whether communities that kept lamps burning at night really reduced crime, or whether it was just a kind of civic theater, an illusion of safety more than a shield. You slide your hand along a nearby post, and the iron feels damp but warm, like skin. A low hiss curls out of the lantern, and for a heartbeat you think it sighs your name. Don't laugh, it wouldn't be the first time objects in forgotten towns carried voices. In some rural parts of Scotland, there are legends of corpse candles, ghostly lights that lead wanderers straight into bogs. Locals swore they'd hover just ahead of travelers, tricking them deeper into the marsh. Your lanterns don't drift, but they burn too steady, too knowing. As you walk, your eyes adjust to the glow, and suddenly every alley is the same pale corridor of flickering amber. You wonder how many lanterns there are. Dozens? Hundreds? Or is it the same few repeating themselves, escorting you deeper without you realizing it? Here comes the joke. If you had a Fitbit, it probably would explode trying to count the steps that don't add up. You pause at a corner where 3 streets meet, a perfect little triangle. Each road stretches into gloom, but the lanterns choose one path for you. They brighten, just a flicker higher, like the volume turning up on a radio. You're not imagining it. They want you to follow. You grin nervously. The town's basically saying, "This way, tourist." You sigh, knowing full well you're about to obey. That's the trouble with curiosity. It's stronger than self-preservation. The cobbles here are slick, reflecting the lantern glow like shallow pools of honey. You hear your footsteps multiply in the echo. 1, then 2, then a soft third that isn't yours. You whip around, of course. Empty. Just empty streets, stretching back into fog. But the lantern behind you flickers out the moment you turn. A little reminder. Forward only. That's the rule. Mainstream fact again. Did you know in Victorian London, lamplighters often doubled as unofficial night guards? They'd stroll through neighborhoods, tending to flames, and many people claimed their presence alone kept away thieves. But here, your lamplighter is invisible. Or maybe worse, always just one corner ahead, never letting you see. Historians debate whether lamplighters were truly respected or quietly resented because they knew everyone's comings and goings. Imagine the gossip they carried, passing every window at twilight. Here, in your sleepy ghost town, whoever tends these flames knows your every step, and you've only just arrived. You feel the town shift under your senses, the way dreams sometimes lurch sideways. The air grows warmer, though your skin prickles with cold. Lanterns swing overhead in rhythm with your breathing, like they're sinking to your body without permission. And of course, you make the mistake of speaking out loud. Just one word. Hello? The lanterns answer with silence, then one by one they dim, leaving only the one ahead blazing brighter than before. Congratulations! You've been promoted from visitor to participant.
You stand in the narrow street, blinking at that single lantern flaring brighter ahead of you. It feels like a living thing now, breathing, pulsing, tugging you toward its light. You step forward, slowly at first, like a cat creeping into an unfamiliar room. Each stride seems to lengthen the road, stretching the space between you and the lamp. But you keep moving. The houses here lean even closer. The rooftops nearly touch overhead, creating a tunnel that traps the lantern's glow. The wood smells old, sour, almost damp with centuries of trapped rain. Shutters slam once, sharp, deliberate, and you jerk your head just in time to see nothing, just lace curtains swaying behind closed glass. Your throat tightens. You mutter under your breath, "Okay, very funny, invisible neighbors." The lantern ahead crackles. You could swear it's laughing, a dry electric cackle that ends as quickly as it began. There's an eerie irony here. Town lanterns once symbolized hospitality, little flames guiding travelers to inns, markets, safe quarters. In Japan during the Edo period, stone lanterns lined temple paths to show pilgrims the way, and the practice bled into everyday town life. But here in your ghostly settlements, the lanterns don't welcome, they command. Historians still argue whether light was always benevolent or whether sometimes it was a leash in disguise. You're leaning toward the latter. You shuffle forward, half expecting the lamp to dim when you get close, but it doesn't. It blazes so fiercely you throw up a hand against the glare. Behind the glass, the flame coils like a serpent, writhing, twisting, pressing against the pane as though it wants out. The iron frame groans with the strain. You lean closer. That's when you see it. For a fraction of a heartbeat, your reflection in the lantern glass isn't yours. Different jawline, hollowed cheeks, eyes too wide. Another traveler maybe, someone who walked here before you and didn't walk out. You jerk back, heart thudding. Joke time. Note to self. Stop checking reflections in haunted lamps. Bad for skincare. You continue. More lanterns ignite ahead, one by one, creating a breadcrumb trail of fire. The first behind you fizzles out with a hiss. The pattern is clear. You're inside a game board, moving step by step, flame by flame. No retreat. The alley spills into another square, smaller this time, with a dry fountain squatting in the middle. But unlike the first plaza, this one has benches scattered around, and every bench holds coats, hats, shoes, arranged neatly as though their owners just stepped away for a moment. Some are moth-eaten, others look almost new. A child's toy horse sits abandoned on the ground, its wheels splintered but shiny. You don't touch anything, not because you're polite, but because you notice the dust. There isn't any. The clothes look freshly brushed, as though invisible hands keep them clean. Lanterns surround the fountain, their glow steady and watchful. You'd take a seat on one bench, careful to avoid brushing the coat lying there. The wood feels warm under you, as if someone just vacated it. The lantern above flickers, almost approving. You're sitting in a ghost waiting room, you realize, a place for travelers between worlds. Historically, towns often had squares where people left goods for barter or charity. In some medieval communities, poor boxes were nailed right into lantern posts, encouraging the wealthy to leave coins for the needy. But here the gifts are garments, outfits of past visitors, maybe. Historians would debate whether you're looking at a memorial or a collection. Either way, you're not about to donate your jacket. Not yet. You shuffle forward, half expecting the lamp to dim when you get close. But it doesn't. It blazes so fiercely you throw up a hand against the glare. Behind the glass, the flame coils like a serpent, writhing, twisting, pressing against the pane as though it wants out. The iron frame groans with the strain. You lean closer. That's when you see it. For a fraction of a heartbeat,
Your reflection in the lantern glass isn't yours. Different jawline, hollowed cheeks, eyes too wide. Another traveler maybe. Someone who walked here before you and didn't walk out. You jerk back, heart thudding. Joke time. Note to self. Stop checking reflections in haunted lamps. Bad for skincare. You continue. More lanterns ignite ahead, one by one, creating a breadcrumb trail of fire. The first behind you fizzles out with a hiss. The pattern is clear. You're inside a game board, moving step by step, flame by flame. No retreat. The alley spills into another square, smaller this time, with a dry fountain squatting in the middle. But unlike the first plaza, this one has benches scattered around, and every bench holds coats, hats, shoes, arranged neatly as though their owners just stepped away for a moment. Some are moth-eaten, others look almost new. A child's toy horse sits abandoned on the ground, its wheels splintered but shiny. You don't touch anything, not because you're polite, but because you notice the dust. There isn't any. The clothes look freshly brushed, as though invisible hands keep them clean. Lanterns surround the fountain, their glow steady and watchful. You take a seat on one bench, careful to avoid brushing the coat lying there. The wood feels warm under you, as if someone just vacated it. The lantern above flickers, almost approving. You're sitting in a ghost waiting room, you realize, a place for travelers between worlds. Historically, towns often had squares where people left goods for barter or charity. In some medieval communities, poor boxes were nailed right into lantern posts, encouraging the wealthy to leave coins for the needy. But here the gifts are garments, outfits of past visitors maybe. Historians would debate whether you're looking at a memorial or a collection. Either way, you're not about to donate your jacket. Not yet. You rise again, pulse loud in your ears. The lanterns sway as though disappointed. Their flames lean sideways, pointing toward a narrow stairway climbing between two houses. The steps are jagged stone, worn thin by centuries of feet. You set one foot down, then another, your shadow stretching unnaturally long across the wall. At the top, a new street waits, narrower, darker. The lanterns here are smaller, their flames trembling like nervous hearts. They don't hum, they whisper. Actual words, strung low and slurred, slipping just out of understanding. You catch fragments. Stay. Don't. Alone. But never the whole sentence. You whisper back, "I'd love a little more clarity, thanks." A lantern pops, spitting sparks, as though offended. Another laughs, an airy chuckle too close to your ear. You rub your arms and keep walking. And then, the strangest detail yet. The flames begin to change color. The first glows a tired yellow. The next burns blue, icy, casting long shadows that jitter like broken film reels. Another shifts green, staining the walls as though algae crept up overnight. You pass them one by one, lanterns now painting you in kaleidoscope shades. Mainstream fact: colored flames aren't unheard of. In some festivals, towns deliberately burn salts to dye flames red or green, both for spectacle and supposed magic. Alchemists experimented with chemicals in lamps centuries ago, trying to prove theories of transformation. Scholars still debate whether these experiments were science or proto-magic. But here, the flames aren't for entertainment. They're warnings maybe, or signals to whoever, whatever, watches you. The blue flame in particular lingers in your memory. Its glow isn't light, it's absence. You can see walls and stones, but your own hands vanish inside it. For a few steps, you're a walking ghost, stripped of substance. When you leave the circle, your body reappears, but your stomach knots. Who else has walked here and never re-emerged? Here comes your second nervous joke. At least if I disappear, my gym membership will finally stop charging me. The colored flames guide you to another corner. Here, the street widens again into what looks like a courtyard. At its far edge stands a gate. Not the final one you'll meet later, but a smaller cousin. Iron bars twist upward, topped with points like teeth. It's locked, chained, rusted. But every lantern behind you dims, except one hanging directly above the gate.
You approach, testing the chains. Cold, brittle. They snap too easily, links scattering across stone like brittle bones. The gate groans open. Beyond it lies more darkness, waiting, eager. You hesitate. Historically, gates in small towns were literal curfews. Many medieval settlements closed theirs at sunset, trapping both residents and travelers inside. Some argue it protected against bandits. Others say it was about control, keeping outsiders from disrupting order. Scholars never quite agree. But here, your gate seems less about keeping danger out and more about keeping you in. You push it open anyway. The lantern above flares in triumph, its flames stretching long like a streamer. You step through, and the gate slams behind you. The sound echoes so loudly the whole street quivers. For a heartbeat, all the lanterns ahead ignite at once, hundreds of them blazing like a constellation. The town's layout reveals itself, streets spiraling outward, converging, twisting like veins. And you are the blood, pulsing through them on command. You laugh once, hollow. Well, guess I'm the entertainment tonight. The lanterns do not disagree.
You trail your fingers along a low stone wall, the surface surprisingly smooth from centuries of hands just like yours brushing past. Imagine all the palms, merchants carrying baskets of salted fish, children racing home after a curfew bell, lovers sneaking glances as they pretended to admire the carved patterns. That kind of continuity makes you shiver, though not entirely from cold. You're connected to them, stitched across time by something as ordinary as worn stone. And then comes the whisper. If people have touched this wall for centuries, how many still linger in ways you can't quite see? You half joke to yourself that maybe one of them is pacing alongside you, muttering about your terrible choice in shoes. The lantern above flickers again, sputtering like a bad Wi-Fi signal. That little strobe makes you hyper-aware of every sound. There's the creak of a shutter swinging on loose hinges, the faint drip of water down a gutter, and a soft sigh that could be wind or someone tired of haunting these cobblestones. Historians still argue whether small towns intentionally designed narrow alleys to trap sound and make footsteps seem louder. Security feature or just bad medieval urban planning. Either way, tonight it feels like the town is amplifying your own presence back at you, reminding you that you don't quite belong. You round a corner and spot a fountain. At least it looks like a fountain. Its basin is cracked, the water long gone, but a stone cherub leans forward as if whispering into the void. You picture it in its prime. Townsfolk filling pitchers, gossip spilling faster than the water. Quirky side fact, in some sleepy towns, people swore fountains had moods. If the water ran cloudy, it was a sign the town council was lying about something. You grinned at the thought. Imagine blaming your mayor because the public fountain had a bad hair day. Still, even here, silence doesn't stay silent. A breeze rattles through the fountain's pipes, and the sound uncannily resembles a low hum. Not quite a song, not quite mechanical. Just a note stretched into the night air. You lean in, straining, half expecting the cherub to finish its whisper with an actual sentence. No luck, though you do realize how close you are to talking back to a hunk of weather-worn limestone. Further along, windows peer down like sleepy eyes. Some are shuttered tight, others cracked just enough that you wonder if someone's watching. It's an odd thought. If every darkened window hides a face, then you're the only one out here playing tag with your shadow. Joke's on them, though, your shadow is winning. You almost wave at one window because nothing diffuses eerie tension like pretending you're in a parade. But you hold back. That's the kind of move that gets you remembered as the outsider who waved at empty glass. And then, almost mercifully, you stumble across a small sign nailed to a crooked post. Its paint has faded, but you can just make out an arrow pointing toward Market Square. Relief flickers in your chest. Market squares are safer, right? Broader space, more lamps, less chance of a cloaked figure deciding you're the evening's entertainment. Though, knowing history, market squares have their own creepy truths.
public executions, witch trials, plague announcements, fun community events. The irony isn't lost on you. The place designed for gathering could feel more haunted than any narrow street. So you keep moving, the stone underfoot uneven yet familiar, your pace neither rushed nor leisurely, somewhere between defiance and curiosity. This is what traveling through a sleepy town at night demands. You accept the unease, let the silence crawl across your skin, and carry on.
The moment you step off the narrow alley and onto the wider street, your ears catch it, a subtle, insistent peal. Not loud, not urgent, just there, like someone has shaken the world gently and left it ringing. The sound threads through the air, curling around the corners, and you realize you've never truly noticed how empty streets can carry noise. Your own footsteps sound hollow, reverberating as though the town itself has hollow bones. It's the midnight bells. You didn't see a tower yet, you don't know which building could possibly be ringing, and yet the echo is real. It reverberates across rooftops, bouncing between chimneys, tugging at the edges of your perception. For a heartbeat, it feels like the sound knows you're here, winding through the streets as if narrating your movements to someone or something listening. You can almost imagine a ghostly bell ringer tugging ropes in rhythm with your pulse. Historically, small towns across Europe installed bells for very practical reasons. In 16th century England, curfew bells warned citizens to put out fires and return indoors. In Italy, campanili marked market hours and even announced criminal trials. They were the heartbeat of a community, the town's pulse translated into metal. Historians still argue whether the communal reliance on bells made towns safer or simply tethered citizens to the authority of whoever rang them. You shiver as the tone stretches again, higher this time, a pure note that splits the night air. You catch the harmonics on rooftops, metal striking metal, wood resonating, and it feels almost alive, as though the bell itself has personality, opinion, maybe even mood. A quirky detail leaps out at you. In some French villages, people once believed that ringing bells at certain hours could drive away evil spirits or prevent lightning strikes. Children were taught to cover their ears not because it hurt, but because the sound might anger mischievous ghosts. You chuckle nervously, realizing your own ears are now ringing with this centuries-old ritual. The town seems to know because it presses the sound closer, curling around the edges of your skull like invisible hands. The echo bounces again, and you notice something new. Shadows move differently when the bells toll. They stretch, shrink, ripple across walls like water. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but your brain picks it up and your pulse spikes. You step lightly, unsure whether you're moving or being pulled. The bell's rhythm changes, a quickening. Not chaotic, not frantic, deliberate. You start to feel as though someone, or 100 someones, are signaling you with sound. Maybe past residents still trying to communicate, or maybe just the town reminding you that it isn't empty. Not really. Joke number 1 sneaks in. Great, now I'm being ghost Morse-coded. Should I reply an interpretive dance or semaphore? You pause. Nothing laughs, not yet, but the air feels thick with expectation. Ahead, a small archway frames the next street. You pass beneath it, and the bells echo differently here. The sound multiplies, bouncing off walls in impossible directions. You catch fragments of rhythm that don't align with reality. One tone lingers behind you for a moment longer than physics would allow, then dissolves into the night. Historically, some European towns experimented with multi-bell systems to create different chimes for different messages: danger, celebration, or simply the hour. Historians still argue whether the acoustic design of bell towers was intentional artistry or accidental physics. In your ghostly town, the effect is hypnotic. You follow instinctively, drawn toward the invisible conductor. You reach a courtyard ringed with lampposts. the same amber glow from the previous alley now mingling with the shadows cast by the bell's resonance. The combination of light and sound makes everything look almost like a stage set. The fountain at the center ripples with memory. Though there is no water, you feel the cadence in the air. Every bell strike seems to ripple across it, distorting the imagined liquid into waves that shimmer in rhythm. You realize something. Even without residents, the town orchestrates itself. Light, sound, shadow, all weaving together to guide, distract, maybe test you. A low hum resonates through the soles of your shoes, vibrating through cobblestones. Your heartbeat matches it. A quirky historical aside. In Japan, temple bells were sometimes struck to mark not just the hour, but personal reflection. People would ring them for prayers, gratitude, or as an offering. Some believed each toll cleared away personal misfortune. You wonder, absurdly, if these midnight bells are doing the same, but on a town-wide scale. Perhaps the sound has cleansed this place of its residents, leaving only you to wander through the echoes. The bells strike again, this time overlapping. You hear minor dissonance, a tiny jolt in the otherwise smooth rhythm. It's like the town is reminding you, notice this, pay attention. You squint. There's no one. Not a person, not a cat. Just the echo bouncing off shuttered windows, peeling paint, and timbers older than memory. Joke number 2. Great, now I'm being ghost Morse-coded. Should I reply in interpretive dance or semaphore? The bells, of course, ignore you, but the lanterns seem to shimmer with approval, as if silently agreeing with your humor. The street narrows again, but here the bells are louder, sharper. They hang above in wrought iron frames, suspended on chains like floating instruments. You notice a faint metallic scent in the air, not unpleasant, just noticeable. Blood? Rust? History? Probably just old iron, but your imagination protests. And then the sound changes. The toll slows, elongating each note until it's more vibration than tone. You feel it in your chest, a pulsing pressure that sets your stomach dancing. Shadows bend in tandem, wrapping around the edges of lanterns, pooling like liquid ink at the base of walls. You realize you've walked into a rhythm, a pattern older than the town itself. Historians still argue whether auditory phenomena like this, reverberations exaggerated by alleyways, led to the origin of ghost stories in sleepy towns. You now understand why. The combination of echoes, narrow streets, and imagination is a perfect recipe for eerie experience. A window above creaks, shutters banging like percussion, perfectly synchronized with a toll. You pause. Everything pauses. A bell tinkles lightly, teasing, then a shadow darts past above you. For a fraction of a second, the rhythm seems alive, aware of you, responsive. You hesitate, then laugh nervously. Okay, orchestra, I get it. You're my audience tonight. The bells pick up again, one extra note added, something off-kilter, too high, too soft, barely perceptible. It's a tone that sets your teeth on edge, though your mouth forms a smile. You remember that in some Italian villages, bell towers were tuned to create specific notes meant to harmonize with church hymns. Some claimed the effect could calm animals, even soothe human tempers. Historians still argue whether it worked, or if it was just superstition and coincidence. Here, it works too well. You feel both calmed and unnerved, a perfect paradox. The lanterns sway above, reflecting flickers on the stones, shadows darting, shapes bending. Every step you take seems anticipated, measured, almost choreographed. Somewhere, a stray cat might be yowling, though you're not sure if it's animal or the bells themselves forming ghostly voices. Joke number 3. I knew music lessons would pay off if surviving ghost orchestras counts as skill. You smirk at your own absurdity, but it helps. Every little joke is a mental anchor in a town that bends reality. You approach a smaller archway at the end of this street. The bells become muted as you near it, each toll thinner, almost sorrowful. The last note lingers in the air like a sigh, stretching into the corners, the alleys, even behind you. You can't see the tower, yet the sound comes from everywhere and nowhere. It feels like the town itself is breathing around you. The echo shifts again, bouncing back to you from walls you didn't notice before. You take a deep breath and step forward. The night stretches, silent now, but the vibrations remain under your feet, a quiet warming. This town remembers everyone who walks its streets, even when nobody is there.
The alley opens into a tiny square, almost like a hidden room. The bells are quieter here, but their sound seems to press in from above, the high notes bending and twisting against the stone walls. You notice that the shadows cast by the lanterns are no longer still. They sway and sync with each bell's tone, elongating and contracting like living entities. You realize the town is orchestrating your perception, sound, light, and shadow working together to manipulate your senses. A faint wind carries the scent of damp wood, old paper, and something metallic. Your imagination kicks in. You envision ghostly bell ringers in ruffled shirts, faces obscured, pulling invisible ropes. Quirky side fact, in some medieval towns, bell ringers were known to add little musical flourishes between the official tolls. Sometimes they'd play mischievous tunes at night, allegedly to confuse thieves or entertain children. Here, you can't tell if the flourishes are deliberate or if your mind is creating music from pure expectation. Historians still argue whether nighttime tinkling was ever meant to be a practical tool or simply folklore amplified over time. The lanterns above flicker in delicate patterns, throwing the square into gentle waves of shadow and gold. You notice that each flame seems to pulse slightly with the bell tools, like they're alive and responsive. You try to catch your reflection in the dark windows of the surrounding buildings, and for a moment your face seems stretched, elongated by the bell's vibrations. The effect is dizzying and you feel a flutter in your stomach. A low murmur comes from the far corner of the square, almost imperceptible. You strain to hear, and the whisper takes form. Don't linger. Your breath catches, and for a moment you consider running, but the town itself seems to slow your feet. You move forward reluctantly, careful to maintain a rhythm in sync with the bells. Historically, tolling bells were sometimes used to control movement, signaling curfews, gatherings, or emergencies. In some English towns, the passing bell marked death, and residents would follow strict protocols when it rang. Scholars debate whether these practices were mainly functional, spiritual, or psychological. In this ghost town, the function is ambiguous, but the effect is palpable. Your movements feel dictated by an invisible authority. A window shutters somewhere above, and a shadow passes behind the curtains. You swear it pauses to watch, then retreats, leaving you to feel like a trespasser in a perfectly still museum. A mischievous part of your brain whispers, maybe it's friendly. Maybe it just wants you to dance to the bell's rhythm. You almost laugh, but the tone of the bells shifts, deeper now, vibrating in your chest like a living drum. The square narrows into a street lined with arches, each decorated with carvings you can barely make out. The bell's echoes cascade off the arches, multiplying the sound until it seems to surround you completely. You realize that you're hearing multiple tolls at once, overlapping in a rhythm that feels designed specifically for you. Joke number 1 sneaks in. Great, now the town has a soundtrack for my panic. You smirk, shaking your head, because humor is a lifeline in this endless night. As you follow the bell's pull, you notice strange marks along the walls, scratches that form shapes almost like symbols or letters. You bend closer to examine them. Some are runic, some resemble tally marks, and some could be nothing but the whim of centuries. Scholars would argue endlessly about whether these are protective symbols, warnings, or simply the random scrawlings of people long gone. For you, they feel like breadcrumbs left specifically for your eyes, guiding, teasing, or testing your curiosity.
A small fountain sits tucked into a corner, stone worn smooth by centuries of hands. You lean over its edge, expecting the water to be still, yet you sense a faint vibration, echoes of the bell's resonance trapped in the stone. You tap lightly, and the hollow note that reverberates feels like it's communicating. Could the town itself be a musical instrument, centuries old, waiting for someone to play its chords? Quirky fact, in some Renaissance towns, fountains were designed not only for water, but as acoustic amplifiers. Bells and voices carried farther through square fountains, intentionally magnifying sound for communication or ritual. Historians still argue whether this was a matter of engineering ingenuity or sheer accident. In your ghost town, the fountain amplifies the bell's presence in a way that makes you hyper-aware of each step, each movement. The lanterns flicker again, this time in colors, green, blue, amber, casting unnatural hues across the cobbles. Shadows stretch, shrink, and twist. One lantern casts a shadow that seems to move independent of the light source, following just a step behind you. You pause, glance over your shoulder, and see nothing, but the sensation remains. You continue down the street, moving toward the next intersection. Every bell toll seems to communicate urgency, warning, or encouragement. The rhythm quickens, pushing you onward. The town, silent in population but booming in orchestration, leads you through alley after alley. You realize you've been following sound longer than you thought, and each echo compounds on the last. Joke number 2, at this rate, I'm going to need a seat in the front row of the ghost orchestra. The bells don't respond, but the faintest flicker of a lantern seems like a wink. You approach another small square, dominated by a low stone arch. The bells change tone as you enter, slower now, deeper, as though acknowledging your passage. You notice more shadows moving along walls, elongated, bending, stretching, but none quite matching your own. There's a sense of presence here, lingering, watching, and perhaps learning your pattern. Historically, small-town bells were sometimes connected to moral or social order. In Germany, citizens were instructed to respond to specific tolls with prayer or reflection, and missing a bell's cue could cause social friction. Scholars debate whether this reinforced community or instilled subtle fear. In your ghost town, the moral structure may be absent, but the psychological impact is undeniable. A faint metallic smell rises from the cobbles. You bend closer, inspecting, and notice tiny grooves in the stone where cart's wheels once rolled. They align with the echo of the bells, almost like the town remembers movement from centuries ago. You step in rhythm with the echoes, and the sensation of walking through history tightens around you like a cloak. The bells toll again, louder this time, resonating across the square. You realize the echoes aren't random, they form a sequence, almost like a code. Each chime, each interval feels deliberate, purposeful. You can't decipher it consciously, yet a part of you understands. This is communication, not just sound. Joke number 3, if these bells are messaging me, I hope it's just welcome and not you're next. The lanterns respond, flaring in sequence, guiding you toward a narrow staircase ascending between two buildings. Shadows wrap around the stairwell like velvet, pulling you upward. The bells seem to follow, maintaining their rhythm, pushing you higher, as though the town wants you to reach a vantage point. You pause at the top, looking back. The square, the alleys, the fountains, all stretch below, silent now, but echoing faintly. The bell's last notes linger, bending through the night air, fading into an eerie harmony that presses against your chest. You realize that in a town with no living residents, sound is the pulse. The bells are memory, warning, and companion all at once. Historically, bell towers serve not just practical purposes, but symbolic ones. They were the town's voice. Scholars still argue whether the psychological impact of these auditory structures shaped citizen behavior more than law or governance. Standing here, you feel that impact, centuries later, echoing through every corner of the ghost town.
The staircase ends at a small landing, an open terrace framed by iron railings. From here, you can see the town spread below like a miniature wrap. Streets twisting like veins, lanterns flickering in quiet, calculated intervals. The bells are softer up here, but their resonance parries farther, vibrating the terrace floor beneath your feet. Every toll seems magnified by altitude, echoing both outward and inward, wrapping you in sound like a cocoon. You kneel to touch the iron railing. It's cool, damp, but solid. Ancient iron forged centuries ago, still bearing the weight of history. A low chime echoes again from the bell tower you still cannot see, a tone so pure it hums inside your chest. You realize that sound can shape space. It molds perception, stretches time, and makes even familiar surroundings feel alien. A quirky historical tidbit surfaces in your mind. In certain Spanish towns, bell towers were constructed specifically to reflect sound off valleys and hills. Villagers believed the echoes carried warnings or blessings over miles. Historians still argue whether the effect was intentional engineering or accidental benefit of geography. Here, on this terrace, the ghosts of acoustic design feel deliberate, too precise to be accidental. You take a deep breath, tasting the cool night air tinged with metal, moss, and faint smoke from long extinguished chimneys. The town beneath is silent except for the bells, yet somehow it feels alive. Shadows of lanterns ripple across cobblestones like liquid. You notice one particular lantern flickering a pattern different from the others, almost Morse code-like, guiding your gaze to the far edge of a narrow street winding down toward a forgotten chapel. That chapel is peculiar. Its spire is crooked, and the stained glass windows are dusty, opaque, yet they catch the lantern light and scatter it in 1,000 muted colors across the street. You can't hear music or singing, but the interplay of light, shadow, and bell chimes creates a rhythm almost like a hymn. You realize the town itself might be performing liturgy tonight, and you are its solitary congregation. Your footsteps descend the stairway, careful, measured, in sync with the final tolls. The echoing notes seem to guide your rhythm, tugging at your instincts. Somewhere in the distance, a shutter slams, perfectly timed with a deep bell toll. It's uncanny, almost like the town is practicing choreography, each movement and sound perfectly synchronized. You pass a small fountain tucked into an alley. The basin is cracked, dry, but when the bells strike, vibrations make the empty stone ripple as though water is still present. You bend over and place your palm on the edge, feeling tiny tremors as if the town's memory pulses beneath your fingers. A shadow passes across the basin, but when you look, nothing is there. Joke number 1 escapes your lips, whispered. Yep, definitely not water. Definitely ghost water. The sound of your voice seems to echo oddly, caught and stretched by unseen walls. The bells answer in harmony, low, vibrating tones that make your teeth buzz. You suppress a shiver. Historically, echoes and bell towers were sometimes blamed for supernatural phenomena. Villagers swore the sound would mimic voices, warn of impending death, or even announce the arrival of spirits. Scholars debate whether these stories stem from acoustic anomalies or pure imagination. You can't argue with what you're feeling. The line between reality and folklore blurs entirely here. You continue down the narrow street. The lanterns sway, their glow pulsing gently in time with the fading chimes. Shadows stretch across walls and rooftops, converging and splitting in ways that make you question geometry. You notice subtle carvings along door sills and walls, symbols of protection perhaps, etched by previous residents. One resembles a crescent moon wrapped in ivy, another is a simple spiral, worn smooth by centuries of hands. You brush your fingers across them, noting the texture, the coolness of stone. A breeze carries the faintest whisper, almost melodic, intertwining with the bells. Move, watch, follow. You shiver. Are you imagining this, or is the town speaking directly to you? The lantern above pulses in response, casting a greenish hue over the pavement, making every shadow stretch longer, every corner deeper. You round another corner, and the bell's echoes begin to overlap in complex patterns. One tone is high and crystalline, another low and resonant, creating dissonance that unsettles yet fascinates you. Your heartbeat starts to sync with the irregular rhythm. You laugh softly, whispering joke number 2. Maybe I'm supposed to dance? Hope I remembered the steps. At the end of the alley, you encounter a tiny square dominated by a clock tower. Its face is cracked, hands frozen, but the bells inside still toll. You realize the tower may have been abandoned for decades, but the mechanism somehow continues to function. Oddly, you feel less frightened than curious. You imagine centuries of caretakers, long gone, who might have left this final symphony as a gift or a warning. Quirky historical fact. In some northern European towns, clock towers continued to strike for years even after being partially dismantled. Locals sometimes considered it a sign of stubborn spirits or residual magic. Scholars still argue whether these were deliberate acts of preservation or accidental mechanical resilience. You lean toward magic tonight. The bells ring louder as you approach, their rhythm accelerating. Shadows from the lanterns stretch across the cobblestones, forming strange patterns. One shadow in particular seems to mimic your own movements, yet sometimes lags, sometimes moves ahead. You glance up. The clock face appears to shift slightly in the moonlight, though it shouldn't be possible. You laugh, whispering joke number 3. All right, clock, keep it up. I'll learn your tricks eventually. The street narrows once more, winding into a steep incline. Each bell toll resonates differently now, bending around corners, bouncing off unseen walls, creating phantom echoes that seem to come from every direction at once. You feel a strange combination of calm and tension, like being simultaneously embraced and warned. You reach the top of the incline, breath steady, and notice a cluster of lanterns grouped unusually close. Their flames flicker in synchronized bursts, forming almost an invisible pattern above the street. You realize that each lantern seems tuned to a specific bell, as if the town itself is an enormous instrument, playing a symphony you didn't know you were meant to hear. Historically, some towns used multi-bell setups to create polyphonic chimes, crafting unique acoustic signatures for each neighborhood. Scholars still debate whether this was an early form of communal music or just coincidence amplified over time. Here, the experience is undeniable. Each step, each sound, each flicker of light feels purposeful. You follow the final lantern group, noting how shadows converge toward a single alley. The echo of the last bell lingers in your chest, vibrating with a resonance that makes the stones themselves hum. You pause, noticing that the street beyond seems darker, quieter, but you feel the memory of sound lingering, pressing at the edges of perception. The alley is narrow, almost claustrophobic, and yet inviting in its own spectral way. Lanterns swing above, rhythmically, as though counting steps. You notice markings on the walls, small etchings that seem to glow faintly under the lantern light, shapes reminiscent of protective sigils, odd geometric patterns and spirals, all guiding your movement. You step forward, feeling more attuned to the bell's rhythm than ever before. The town, deserted yet vigilant, seems to recognize you as a participant. You're no longer a mere wanderer. You've become part of the performance. Your movements choreographed by centuries of sound, shadow, and light.
The moment you step off the wider street and into the first alley, the world feels compressed. Lanterns hang above, spaced unevenly, their flames swaying gently in a night breeze you barely notice. Shadows stretch along the walls like living fingers, bending and twisting with each flicker. You realize that light itself is a storyteller here, casting exaggerated, teasing shapes that hint at movement, whispering secrets you might not want to hear. The alley smells of damp stone, faint moss, and old wood, with occasional wafts of something sweetly rotting, fallen fruit left to decompose in a bygone market season.
You step lightly, mindful of uneven cobblestones that jut out like miniature speed bumps, and notice the shadows twist strangely as you pass. They mimic your movements, but sometimes they lag behind, sometimes surge ahead, as though teasing you. Historically, small towns relied on oil or tallow lanterns to light alleys, long before gas lamps or electricity. Their flickering created uneven light, shadows that often distorted perspective, and sometimes gave the impression that figures were moving where none existed. Scholars still argue whether these effects amplified local fears intentionally or were simply a byproduct of low-tech lighting. A subtle creak comes from above, and your ears pick up a faint whispering, a voice almost carried by the wind, repeating indiscernible syllables. You pause, holding your breath. Your mind races, imagining the ghosts of past residents murmuring in hidden corners. Quirky fact, some towns believed that whispered alley voices were the spirits of lost travelers, guiding the living or warning them away from danger. You smile nervously at the thought, a centuries-old auditory prank orchestrated by the departed. The lantern above your head flickers in response to the whisper, its glow elongating your shadow against the wall. You lean forward to inspect the uneven cobblestones, noticing faint scratches, initials, symbols, random marks that centuries of passers-by left behind. They are worn smooth, yet still legible if you look closely. It's as if the alley itself remembers everyone who walked it. A deeper, richer scent catches your attention. Old wood smoke, faintly charred stone. You imagine chimneys long gone, fires once burning to heat houses now empty, the smoke's memory lingering in the very walls. Your imagination weaves stories of families, merchants, and children who tiptoed through these alleys, carrying candles, their shadows dancing along the walls just like yours. You round a corner, and the alley bends sharply. The lantern's light catches on metal brackets, sending fractured patterns across the cobblestones. Each flicker seems calculated, a deliberate play of shadows. You step carefully, aware that the shadows can trick the eye. What you perceive as depth or movement might not be nothing but the interplay of flame and stone. Historians still argue whether human perception is naturally predisposed to exaggerate threats in dimly lit spaces, or whether these exaggerated fears were culturally reinforced through stories, rituals, and local legends. Here, in this alley, the distinction blurs entirely. Every flicker, every shadow feels purposeful. A small wooden door on the right stands slightly ajar. Moonlight spills in from above, slanting through the gap. The shadows inside the doorway twist unnaturally, reaching outward, almost like they're trying to grab at you. A chill runs down your spine, but curiosity nudges you closer. Quirky historical tidbit, some European towns intentionally left doors ajar at night, claiming spirits would pass through and prevent the living from being trapped or cursed. You wonder if this door has the same function, or if it's merely an accident preserved by centuries. You continue walking, shadows crawling along walls, lanterns flickering, whispers brushing against your ears like static. Every sound is amplified in this tight alley. A distant drip, the faint creak of an old shutter, the echo of your own breath. The ambient noise creates an auditory illusion that heightens your awareness and perhaps your anxiety. A subtle, almost imperceptible movement catches your eye. A rat scurrying across a beam of lantern light. Its shadow stretches taller than the creature itself, giving it a grotesque, almost spectral presence. You grin, whispering joke number one. Great, now the rats are bigger than me. Fantastic. The alley remains silent in response, save for the persistent whispering echoes you can't quite place. Historically, narrow alleys were a perfect breeding ground for rumors and imagination. The interplay of dim light, sound, and human expectation created spaces that were easily labeled as haunted or dangerous. Scholars still debate whether these perceptions were driven by innate fear or by a deliberate cultural narrative that taught townspeople to respect or fear the night. You pass a moss-covered stone wall, the green faintly glowing under the lantern's flicker. You press your hand against it and feel a strange vibration, subtle but noticeable, as if the alley itself hums in response to your movement. It's a sensation simultaneously calming and unsettling.
The alley twists again, leading into a miniature courtyard. Lanterns swing above, casting overlapping shadows that morph into fantastical shapes. Twisted animals, elongated humans, abstract patterns. You can't look away. The courtyard seems alive, animated by the interplay of flickering light and deep shadows. A quirk surfaces in your mind. In some sleepy towns, people believed that lantern shadows could carry messages or warnings. Shadows that moved oddly or lingered were interpreted as omens. You can't help but notice the uncanny alignment of lantern light here, almost as if the town itself wants to tell you something or test your attention. You step into the courtyard, careful to maintain a steady pace. Each footfall echoes slightly, harmonizing with the faint whispers from unseen sources. You realize that sound, shadow, and movement have formed an intricate network guiding your journey. Historians still argue whether this combination of light, shadow, and ambient sound in medieval towns contributed significantly to local folklore, or if it was simply incidental sensory input amplified by human imagination. You don't care about the debate right now. You only know that the alley has a personality. The next lantern flickers violently, a sudden burst of brightness that casts a dancing shadow resembling a human figure on the wall. You freeze. Your own shadow reacts simultaneously, creating a double, two moving entities perfectly synchronized yet independent. You whisper joke number 2. Great, now I have a twin, just what I needed. The alley bends again, a tight S-curve that narrows with each step. Shadows merge and split as you move, forming ephemeral patterns that resemble writing or symbols. You lean closer to examine them, noticing some glyphs etched into the stone, faint but deliberate. They could be protective marks, messages, or merely centuries of graffiti. A faint murmur accompanies the movement of shadows. You strain to listen. It almost sounds like someone is speaking, yet no one is present. A curious fact, in towns across Europe, alley echoes often created the illusion of voices, particularly on windy nights. Locals believed spirits or trickster entities were at work. Scholars still argue whether these auditory illusions were primarily psychological or if some natural acoustic phenomena were involved. The alley widens slightly, revealing a shallow well in its center. The stone edge is smooth and worn from centuries of use. Lanterns above cast circular shadows across its mouth, making it seem like a portal into the town's history. You peer inside, but see only darkness. The faint echo of the bells you followed earlier drifts down into the well, vibrating the stones, reverberating in the surrounding walls. Joke number 3 escapes as a whisper. Sure, let me just peek into the abyss. Nothing could go wrong. The town ignores your humor, but the shadows twist slightly, perhaps in acknowledgement. You continue through the alley, now attuned to every flicker, every whisper, every movement. Lanterns swing, their glow elongating shadows, shaping them into grotesque or whimsical figures. The interplay of light and dark feels deliberate, designed to challenge perception. Historically, some towns used narrow alleys and lantern placement to create strategic darkness, enhancing security or disguising patrol routes. Scholars still argue whether this was practical urban design or an early form of theater, turning nightly walks into experiences of shadow and suggestion. Here, it feels theatrical indeed, almost like the town has rehearsed for centuries to stage your passage. At the end of the alley, a small arch opens onto another street. Wider this time, the lanterns more evenly spaced. Shadows remain, elongated, flickering, whispering, but less oppressive. You take a deep breath, feeling both relief and a lingering tingle of apprehension. The town has guided you, tested you, and perhaps welcomed you.
You step into the wider street, but the effect of the alleys lingers. Lanterns flicker at uneven intervals, casting long, bending shadows that stretch toward you like curious fingers. You notice the subtle difference in light intensity. Some lanterns glow warmly, others burn with a cold bluish hue. The contrast feels intentional, almost as if the town itself is experimenting with your perception. A faint scraping sound comes from above, high on a roof. Your eyes track it, but you see nothing moving. The shadows respond as if they sense the noise, rippling across walls and cobblestones. You realize that your mind is now hyper-aware of every minor detail, every fluctuation in light and sound. A quirk. In 17th century towns, watchmen were said to move lanterns strategically to create shadows that concealed their patrols or intimidated potential wrongdoers. Historians still argue whether these techniques were truly effective or mostly psychological theater. You walk cautiously, noting the subtle textures of the walls. Moss clings to crevices, damp patches darken stones, and tiny carvings peek from under centuries of grime. Initials, symbols, abstract shapes, each one feels like a whisper from the past, marking presence and time. You can't help but reach out and trace a spiral etched into a worn wall. It vibrates faintly under your touch, almost in tune with the lantern's flickering glow. The air shifts. A soft wind brushes your neck. Whisper-like sounds drift on the breeze, unintelligible, fragmented, yet distinctly human in cadence. You can almost catch words, then they vanish. A quirky tidbit emerges. In some European towns, it was believed that alley whispers carried messages from the dead, warnings or invitations. Historians still argue whether these tales stem from acoustic phenomena, superstitions, or pure imagination amplified by fear. You don't need certainty, the experience is enough. Shadows on the cobblestones begin to merge and split in patterns that suggest movement where none exists. You pause, your reflection in a broken window briefly appearing behind you only to vanish when you turn. The alley seems to respond, the lanterns flickering in counterpoint to your hesitation. You whisper joke number 1. Fantastic, now even reflections are in on this game. The alley bends and a small archway opens into a quiet square. Lanterns hang low, swaying gently, their glow catching on small puddles from earlier rain. Each ripple creates dancing patterns that elongate shadows in hypnotic rhythm. You notice that these shadows seem almost sentient, stretching toward you, receding, pooling in corners. You realize your mind is synchronizing with their movement, involuntarily matching steps to rhythm. Historically, lantern shadows in narrow town squares were known to create illusions of movement, influencing social behavior. People would hesitate to enter certain alleys or streets after dark, partly due to practical safety concerns, and partly because of the exaggerated sense of danger created by shadows. Historians still argue whether these spatial designs were conscious or accidental. A faint metallic scent drifts from a nearby grate. You bend closer, peering into the darkness. The alley floor is worn with grooves, perhaps from carts or centuries of foot traffic. You notice tiny engravings along the edges. Letters, symbols, abstract shapes. Each one feels like a whisper from the past, marking presence and time. You can't help but reach out and trace a spiral etched into a worn wall. It vibrates faintly under your touch, almost in tune with the lantern's flickering glow. Joke number 2 slips out softly. Great. Now even reflections are in on this game. Hope it doesn't bite. The lanterns flicker, and for a heartbeat, you swear the shadows ripple in acknowledgement. You continue, deeper into a twisting passage. The alley's narrow again, the walls closing in slightly. Lanterns flicker overhead, forming patterns that sometimes align, sometimes clash. Your eyes dart from shadow to shadow, trying to discern meaning. The flickers create shapes reminiscent of animals, faces, letters, but always just out of reach of recognition. You realize the town's design primes your imagination, blurring line between reality and suggestion. Historically, narrow alleys and irregular lighting were known to amplify perception. People reported seeing figures, hearing voices, sensing presences that weren't physically there. Scholars still debate whether these experiences were purely psychological or whether acoustic anomalies contributed to auditory hallucinations. You can't separate the two tonight. The alley is alive in perception, if not in reality. A subtle scratching sound arises from a nearby wall. You pause, listening carefully. The sound is soft, rhythmic, like nails tracing stone. Your pulse quickens. The lanterns above sway, casting dancing shadows that match the rhythm. You lean closer to investigate, but see only worn stone and faint engravings.
The alley seems to be both revealing and concealing itself simultaneously. The whispers intensify subtly, brushing past your ears, fragmented words mingling with faint bell echoes from the town center. You strain to understand, catching snippets like follow, watch, remember. You shiver, unsure whether the town is speaking to you or whether your mind is completing the narrative. Quirky historical note: in certain medieval towns, whispering corridors were intentionally created for courtships, secret meetings, or confessions. Sounds carried along alleys in surprising ways, allowing distant conversations to be overheard or protected. Historians still argue how much of this practice influenced ghost stories and local legends. Tonight, you feel that tradition alive. You pass a narrow doorway slightly ajar. Shadows flicker within, the lanterns catching the edge of a wooden beam. You step cautiously, trying not to disturb the delicate balance of light and dark. The faint echo of footsteps, your own, someone else, synchronize with the alley's whispers. Joke number 3. Great, now the alley has a soundtrack, a light show, and probably a hidden audience. Should I bow? You chuckle quietly, appreciating the humor as a stabilizer in the town's eerie performance. The alley widens into a small square, the lanterns hanging low above. The interplay of light and shadow is hypnotic, creating shapes and patterns you can't fully process. Shadows move as if independent, elongating and bending in impossible ways. You feel simultaneously observed and guided, as though the town is aware of your passage and subtly approving your progress. Historically, lantern placement was often strategic, guiding foot traffic and creating dramatic effects at night. Shadows and light were as much a part of civic design as cobblestones or fountains. Scholars still argue whether these effects were primarily functional, aesthetic, or accidental. You don't need their verdict tonight. The experience is visceral. You approach a well in the center of the square, its stone worn smooth. The lanterns above reflect off the water's surface, or what you imagine is water, casting dancing patterns across the surrounding walls. You lean close, the whispers brushing your ears, seeming to invite you to peer deeper. A faint vibration resonates beneath your feet, subtle but distinct. The town itself seems to hum in tandem with the lanterns and shadows. You step back, taking in the full scene, realizing that every element, the light, the shadow, the whisper, the echo, is part of a meticulously orchestrated sensory experience.
You step carefully around the well, noticing how shadows converge at its base, stretching and twisting like dark ribbons. Each lantern's glow seems to accentuate particular textures in the cobblestones, worn grooves, tiny cracks, and small moss patches that pulse faintly in the flickering light. You can almost feel the weight of centuries pressing subtly against your feet, the memories of countless footsteps embedding themselves in the stones beneath you. A subtle wind brushes past, carrying fragments of sound, faint whispers, the distant tinkle of bells, and the rhythmic scraping of unseen objects. You strain to listen, catching snatches of syllables that feel almost like sentences, but slip away before comprehension. Quirky fact, in medieval European towns, whispered sounds along narrow alleys were sometimes believed to carry messages between secret societies or guilds. Historians still argue whether such practices were widespread or merely the product of imagination and rumor. Tonight, you experience both. You round a sharp corner, entering a tiny courtyard. Lanterns hang lower here, swaying in unison, their light bouncing off walls and puddles, creating complex, shifting patterns. Shadows lengthen, contract, and overlap, forming geometric shapes that seem almost like written language. A faint metallic scent drifts from a nearby grate, hinting at forgotten workshops, rusted tools, or long-abandoned machinery. The whispers grow slightly louder, brushing against your ears in a rhythm that seems designed to pull your attention. You feel the urge to pause, to lean in and try to decipher them, but the path continues ahead. The narrow streets seem to push you forward, guiding you, gently but insistently, toward the next twist in the labyrinth. Quirky tidbit: In some historic towns, alley sounds, whispers, creaks, footsteps, were believed to carry supernatural significance. Residents interpreted echoing noises as omens, messages, or protective signals. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were psychological, acoustic, or culturally reinforced. You don't need to know the answer. The sensation itself is compelling enough. The courtyard narrows into a steep incline. The lanterns above pulse faintly in time with your footsteps, creating an uncanny synchronicity. Shadows elongate and bend in ways that seem physically impossible, sometimes appearing in your peripheral vision and vanishing when you look directly. You whispered joke number 2. Of course, now gravity is optional for shadows. Perfect. A wooden door set into the wall catches your attention. Its paint is peeling, hinges rusted, but the lantern light strikes it in a way that creates a luminous outline. You notice faint carvings around the frame, spirals, crosses, and abstract symbols. Could these be protective marks, remnants of old rituals, or mere decoration? Scholars still argue whether such carvings were primarily functional, symbolic, or purely decorative. You continue upward, the alley narrowing further. Each step amplifies the faint vibration beneath your feet, like the town itself is subtly resonating. Whispers brush your ears again, this time forming almost discernible phrases. Follow, heed, remember, but they dissolve as quickly as they form. The combination of auditory cues, shadows, and faint sense makes your perception stretch, your mind hyper-aware of every sensory input. Historically, narrow alleys amplified sound dramatically, sometimes carrying whispers from one end to another. Townspeople use this phenomenon to communicate, warn, or create mystery. Scholars still debate how much of these perceptions were accidental acoustic or deliberately cultivated to instill vigilance or fear. Tonight, you don't need their verdict. You can feel it viscerally. You round another bend, discovering a tiny moss-covered archway. Shadows pool beneath it, thick and dark, yet lanterns above cast faint light that reveal intricate carvings on the walls. Spirals, abstract shapes, and protective sigils, each seems to tell a story, yet their meaning remains elusive. You trace your fingers over a spiral, feeling subtle vibrations under your touch, as if the town's memory resonates physically through stone. A faint breeze carries whispers again, almost coherent now. Step lightly, observe, continue. The voice is neither friendly nor hostile, merely insistent. You step forward carefully, following the cues. Lanterns flicker in subtle synchrony, guiding your path. You realize the town has orchestrated your entire journey, blending light, shadow, sound, and scent into a cohesive narrative of sensory exploration. Quirky historical note: towns often relied on lanterns and shadows to subtly manipulate movement, conceal hazards, or direct attention. Some believed that shadow play could even ward off misfortune. Scholars still debate the extent to which these practices were intentional urban planning or emergent phenomena. Standing here, you feel both history and legend coalescing into tangible experience.
You leave the labyrinthine alleys behind and step into the forgotten marketplace. Moonlight spills unevenly across cracked cobblestones, illuminating stalls long abandoned, their wooden frames splintered, faded awnings fluttering with the slightest breeze. Dust motes hang suspended in the air, glinting like tiny stars caught in a slow orbit. The marketplace feels immense, yet intimate, as if time itself slowed here while the rest of the town marched on without notice. A faint metallic scent mixes with dry earth and lingering traces of herbs, spices, and the faintest hint of smoke from extinguished cooking fires. You inhale deeply, letting the aromas guide your imagination. You can almost hear the chatter of merchants, the creak of wagon wheels, and the clinking of coins long vanished from pockets. Quirky tidbit: In some medieval towns, marketplaces were deliberately designed to enhance acoustics, allowing merchants' calls to carry farther and echo off nearby buildings. Historians still argue whether these echo patterns were intentional or merely serendipitous. Your footsteps echo lightly against the stones, merging with faint nocturnal sounds, the rustle of leaves, the occasional flutter of a rat or bird, and a distant bell from somewhere deep within the town. Shadows twist across the market stalls, stretching and bending with the flickering of a lone lantern. You lean closer to inspect a cracked wooden barrel, running your fingers along its ridged surface. The grooves feel worn, polished by centuries of hands. A sudden gust of wind rattles a hanging sign, the creak of its hinges reverberating like an unintentional percussion instrument. You start to notice a rhythm in the echoes, a subtle cadence that seems to guide your movement across the marketplace. Shadows elongate, forming strange silhouettes, some humanoid, some completely abstract. You whisper joke number 1, "Ah yes, the local shadow puppetry troupe. I'm honored to attend their midnight performance." Historically, abandoned marketplaces weren't just centers of commerce, they were theaters of social life. Citizens gathered not only to trade goods, but also to share gossip, perform music, and participate in impromptu contests. Scholars still debate whether the nocturnal echoes of empty markets contributed to folklore about spirits and hauntings. Here, you feel that legacy in every vibration of the stone beneath your feet. You approach a stall that once sold pottery. Broken shards litter the ground, their smooth curves catching the faint lantern light. Some fragments are painted with intricate patterns, now faded, but still recognizable. You bend down, brushing away dirt and leaves, and feel the subtle indentation of fingerprints pressed centuries ago into the clay. There's a tactile hum to history here, a sensation that connects past and present through touch. A faint whisper drifts past your ears, brushing the hair at your nape. Observe, remember, follow. The words are barely audible, yet undeniably present. You step carefully, noticing how each footfall seems to synchronize with the faint echoes, a hidden rhythm guiding your exploration. Quirky historical fact: in some towns, echoes from market stalls were believed to carry secret messages between traders or even warnings from ancestors. Historians still argue whether these echoes were mere coincidence or subtly cultivated by design. You wander past a stack of old crates, long rotted, and notice carved initials and symbols etched into the wood. Spirals, crosses, geometric patterns, each a personal signature, a mark of presence in the endless flow of time. Some carvings are practical, noting quantities or prices. Others seem decorative or protective, perhaps wards against misfortune. You trace a spiral with your fingertip, feeling the faint vibration of centuries pass beneath your touch. The night air shifts, carrying a whiff of faintly burnt wood and dried herbs. You imagine the bustle of daytime markets, merchants haggling, children running between stalls, the scent of bread and smoked meats mingling with fresh produce. The contrast between memory and present emptiness is striking. Joke number 2 escapes softly, nothing like a market that serves ghosts for breakfast. You notice a lone lantern flickering erratically above a central fountain. The fountain is dry, its stone basin cracked and weathered, yet the lantern light casts dancing patterns on the surrounding walls. Shadows stretch toward you, then recede, forming abstract shapes that seem almost like letters or symbols. You realize that the town itself is orchestrating this performance, manipulating light, shadow, and sound to guide your senses. Historically, central fountains were focal points in marketplaces, serving both practical and social functions. They provided water for citizens and livestock, a gathering place for announcements, and occasionally a platform for performers or preachers. Scholars still debate whether the nocturnal echoes in empty fountains contributed to ghost stories or were merely a sensory byproduct of stone and water. You step closer to the fountain, noticing a faint hum beneath your feet. The vibrations are subtle, rhythmic, almost musical. You kneel to touch the stone edge, feeling a pulse that seems to synchronize with distant, ghostly echoes of bell tolls and whispered syllables. The town's memory reverberates through the stones, guiding your attention to subtle details you might have otherwise missed. A broken sign above an old bakery stall flutters in the wind. Its hinges squeak rhythmically, adding another layer to the midnight orchestra of the marketplace. You laugh softly, joke number 3, perfect, now even inanimate objects have a sense of timing. The alleyways feeding into the market remain dark, but faintly lit by distant lanterns, shadows pooling and stretching in unpredictable patterns. You move along the market's main thoroughfare, noting the residual scent of herbs, bread, and smokewood lingering in cracks between stones. The flickering lanterns create shifting patterns of light, exaggerating textures and amplifying the sense of depth. A faint scratching sound emerges from a pile of wooden crates, perhaps a rat or the whisper of time itself. You strain your ears, listening to the rhythm of the night. Historically, marketplaces were designed to maximize engagement and visibility. Merchants positioned stalls and lanterns strategically, optimizing both safety and commerce. Scholars still debate whether ghost stories and tales of spectral traders were influenced by these architectural choices or merely cultural storytelling. Tonight, you walk through the fusion of design, history, and folklore. You pause at the edge of an empty stall once used for textiles. Faded fabrics, now brittle and moth-eaten, hang limply from rusted hooks. Lantern light plays across their surfaces, forming shadows that suggest flowing movement. You imagine the bustle of a merchant showing cloths to prospective buyers, children weaving through legs, and coins exchanging hands. The textures, colors, and scents form an invisible mosaic of memory. A faint whisper echoes again. Step lightly. Observe closely. You feel guided by the town itself, every movement harmonized with centuries of sound, shadow, and memory. You step forward carefully, absorbing the ambiance, noticing cracks in stones, worn edges of barrels, and the subtle vibration in metal lantern brackets. Quirky historical tidbit. In some towns, it was believed that lingering nocturnal sounds of markets carried warnings or guidance from ancestors, a sort of acoustic inheritance. Scholars still argue whether this practice was deliberate, accidental, or purely imaginative. In this market tonight, it feels tangible. The shadows pool near an overturned cart, forming shapes that almost resemble figures crouching, whispering, or waiting. You step closer, and they shift, merging and stretching across cobblestones, a choreography of darkness. You realize that the interplay of light, shadow, sound, and history and imagination is a language of the town itself, a language you are slowly learning to read.
You wander further into the market's heart, where the stalls cluster tightly and shadows pool in corners as if huddling together. The lanterns above sway faintly, creating irregular patterns of light and darkness that morph with each gust of wind. You notice that some shadows stretch unnaturally, reaching across cobblestones and climbing walls, like elongated fingers brushing against your perception. The faint scent of dried herbs mixes with musty wood, ancient stone, and the lingering aroma of baked bread long since vanished. Each inhale seems to carry a subtle whisper of history, as if the market itself is speaking in a language you almost understand. Quirky fact: medieval marketplaces often doubled as social hubs where stories, gossip, and news traveled faster than official proclamations. Scholars still argue whether the lingering echoes at night are accidental or a psychic residue of centuries of human chatter. A broken wheelbarrow leans against a wall, half hidden by shadows. The wood is cracked, rusted metal hooks jutting out like skeletal fingers. You approach cautiously, aware that every step seems amplified by the alleyways feeding into the market square. Your footfall echoes in rhythmic pulses, blending with distant murmurs and faint bell tolls, creating an eerie nocturnal symphony. Joke number 1 slips from your lips. Wonderful, now I'm conducting a ghost orchestra. Hope my baton is invisible. The air shifts. A breeze carries soft, indistinct whispers that seem to rise from cracks in the cobblestones themselves. You lean down to listen, catching fragments of words. Remember, follow, beware. But they dissipate like smoke. You step across the square, eyes tracing the intricate patterns of shadows cast by flickering lanterns.
Some forms resemble faces, others animals, and still others spiral into abstract shapes. The mind tries to interpret them, forming fleeting stories that vanish when scrutinized. Historians still argue whether these visual illusions contributed to local folklore or were simply incidental products of architecture and light. Tonight, the answer feels irrelevant. The experience is immersive enough. A faint metallic scent drifts from an abandoned blacksmith stall. You approach, examining rusted tools, broken anvils, and ash-stained stone. The moonlight catches a jagged shard of metal, sending a sliver of reflected light across the cobblestones. Shadows shift in reaction, forming jagged, abstract shapes that stretch unnaturally along walls. You step lightly, careful not to disturb the delicate play of light and darkness. The market narrows again, leading into a small alcove partially covered by wooden beams. Lanterns flicker above, casting overlapping shadows that form complex, transient patterns. You notice carvings in the stone, abstract spirals, faint letters, symbols whose meanings have faded over time. You trace your fingers along one, feeling a subtle vibration, almost like the stone itself is aware of your touch. Quirky historical note. In some medieval towns, these carvings served as markers for merchants, spiritual symbols, or playful graffiti. Scholars still debate whether their original intent was functional, symbolic, or purely aesthetic. Your fingertips glide over history, brushing the stories of those who came before. A faint creaking sound drifts from an overhead shutter. You glance up. The wood quivers in response to the breeze, shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. You step closer, noticing how the lanterns catch on edges, forming new abstract shapes. The market seems alive with subtle motion, shadows performing an intricate dance choreographed by centuries of wind, light, and human activity. You wander past a pile of cracked pottery shards. Broken bowls, jars, and mugs glint in lantern light, shadows merging with their jagged edges. You imagine their previous owners, hands shaping clay, fire hardening vessels, children sneaking between legs, coins clinking in tiny hands. The sensory tapestry merges past and present, your imagination bridging the centuries. The whispers intensify subtly. Brushing your ears in rhythmic cadences, you strain to hear, catching syllables that almost form words. Observe, remember, proceed. They are neither threatening nor comforting, simply insistent. You feel guided, your senses attuned to the town's rhythm. Joke number 2 escapes softly. Perfect. I'm now the ghostly apprentice. Hope my baton is invisible. The market narrows further, stalls merging into tight passages, shadows elongating and bending unnaturally. The lanterns above flicker with a subtle rhythm, creating hypnotic patterns on walls and cobblestones. You feel guided, subtly pushed along by invisible currents of light, shadow, and sound. The town's memory pulses faintly beneath your feet, harmonizing with the whispers and rustles that surround you. Joke number 3. Wonderful. I've just become the solo audience for the town's midnight opera. Bravo, everyone. The market narrows further.
You follow the narrowing path, aware that every footstep echoes differently depending on where you place your weight. Shadows bend unnaturally around corners, pooling in small hollows, stretching along walls in hypnotic patterns. The air is cooler here, carrying hints of damp wood, dry herbs, and faint traces of smoke. You take a slow, deliberate breath, letting your senses map the unseen history woven into the stones beneath your feet. A faint metallic clink draws your attention to a pile of rusted tools near a collapsed stall. Lantern light glints off jagged edges, creating dancing patterns that stretch unnaturally across the walls.
You lean closer, noticing faint engravings on the handles. Numbers, initials, and abstract symbols. Some marks are utilitarian, others seem purely decorative. You trace a spiral, feeling a faint vibration through the wood. Quirky tidbit. Blacksmiths in medieval towns sometimes carved symbols into tools as talismans or signatures. Historians still debate whether these were functional, symbolic, or artistic gestures. Tonight, it doesn't matter. You feel the choreography of centuries guiding you. The alley opens slightly into a courtyard, the faint glow of lanterns revealing more abandoned stalls. You notice a small fountain, the stone cracked and dry, yet the moonlight bouncing off puddles in its basin creates a fragmented reflection that moves like liquid shadows. You step closer, and the whispers intensify. Observe, remember, proceed. They are soft, insistent, guiding your attention without command. You pause, studying a faded sign above a stall that once sold fabrics. The paint has flaked, leaving only traces of letters and abstract patterns. Lantern light catches a delicate thread hanging from the stall's edge, casting a long shadow on the cobblestones. You imagine merchants draping colorful cloths for customers, children sneaking between legs, coins clinking in small hands. The market breathes memory. Every surface, every shadow holds stories waiting to be perceived. Joke number 1 escapes softly. Great, I've just entered a museum curated by ghosts. You chuckle quietly, aware that humor anchors you in this eerie sensory experience. You continue through the courtyard, noting that shadows now form elaborate, almost geometric patterns across the walls. Shapes appear to merge and separate in hypnotic rhythm. Your footsteps fall in sync with distant bell echoes, rustling leaves, and faint creaks from hanging signs. Quirky historical fact. Some medieval urban planners intentionally created these acoustical effects to enhance social interaction and influence movement within markets. Scholars still debate whether these designs were intentional or accidental. Tonight, it doesn't matter. You feel the choreography of centuries guiding you. Near the far edge of the courtyard, a pile of pottery shards catches the moonlight. Broken bowls, mugs, and jars reflect fragmented illumination, and shadows coil around them like living tendrils. You lean down, brushing dirt and leaves away, and feel the subtle contours of centuries-old fingerprints pressed into the clay. There's a tactile resonance, a connection to the countless hands that touched these objects long ago. The whispers grow slightly louder, brushing against your ears in fragmented phrases. Remember, step lightly, follow. You pause, letting the sounds weave into your consciousness. Every sensory input, the texture of stone, the shifting shadows, the faint sense of the marketplace, melds into a cohesive tapestry. The town's memory seems alive, guiding you toward hidden details with subtle insistence. You notice a narrow stairway leading up from the courtyard. Wooden steps creak softly as you ascend, lanterns overhead flickering in rhythmic patterns. Shadows stretch along the walls, forming abstract faces, animals, and spirals. The faint scent of smoke and dry herbs persists, merging with musty stone and worn wood. You feel simultaneously observed and guided, as if the town itself is conscious of your passage. Quirky fact. Stairways in medieval marketplaces were sometimes used strategically to create dramatic viewpoints, controlling sight lines and sound propagation. Scholars still debate whether these architectural choices influenced the development of urban myths and ghost stories. As you climb, you sense that both function and folklore converge here. At the top, you enter a small balcony overlooking the market below. From this vantage point, the lanterns form a mosaic of light, each flicker contributing to a living, breathing shadow play. Broken stalls, cracked fountains, and scattered pottery below all become part of a silent performance orchestrated across centuries. You lean against the railing, letting your senses absorb the interplay of movement, sound, and light.
A sudden wind rustles the hanging fabrics in a nearby stall, creating an almost musical rhythm. The echoes blend with distant whispers, forming a subtle nocturnal symphony. You inhale deeply, tasting faint scents of dried herbs, bread, and firewood carried on the night breeze. The market's sensory memory is complete, yet constantly shifting, as if the town resists stagnation. Joke number 2 drifts softly from your lips. Wonderful! The ghostly market now has a soundtrack. Hope it doesn't demand royalties. You smile, letting humor ground you as the town's intricate dance of shadow, sound, and scent unfolds round you. You descend the stairway slowly, observing the subtle changes in shadow patterns as lanterns sway above. Every step shifts the geometry of light across the walls, revealing textures, carvings, and symbols previously hidden. You run your fingers along the cracked stone, feeling subtle impressions, the residue of countless lives passing through this marketplace. Historically, marketplaces were hubs of commerce, social exchange, and cultural expression. Each tactile surface, scent, and echo carried information, from trade secrets to communal memory. Scholars still debate how much lingering sensory phenomena at night were intentional versus emergent effects of materials and design. Standing here, you feel both interpretations simultaneously, your mind bridging past and present. You approach a narrow alley at the edge of the market, where lanterns flicker sporadically. Shadows twist unnaturally along the walls, forming shapes that your mind recognizes as vaguely human, animal, and abstract. Every sound, the scrape of a crate, the faint clink of metal, your own breath, merges into the town's nocturnal rhythm. You notice the metallic scent again, faint but distinct, mingling with herbaceous and earthy tones. A collapsed stall offers glimpses of carved wood and faded signage. Spirals, initials, and abstract patterns hint at centuries of human activity. You trace the grooves with your fingers, feeling subtle vibrations, as if the town itself pulses under your touch. Quirky tidbit. These carvings sometimes served as directional markers, memory aids, or protective symbols. Scholars still argue their original purpose and significance. You step lightly across the cobblestones, guided by the faint rhythm of echoes and whispering voices. The market seems alive, orchestrating each movement, each breath, each glance. You realize that every sensory element, the flickering lanterns, shifting shadows, faint scents, creaking wood, is part of a deliberate choreography crafted over centuries, whether intentional or emergent. The whispers grow more distinct, soft but insistent. Observe, remember, continue. You listen without straining, letting the rhythm seep into your consciousness. The marketplace is teaching you, not through words, but through the interplay of senses, guiding your awareness to subtleties that would otherwise remain unnoticed. You approach the edge of the marketplace, where a small fountain basin glimmers faintly. Moonlight reflects across the cracked stone, creating fractured patterns that ripple like water across the surrounding walls. Shadows coil around the basin, forming transient shapes, faces, animals, and abstract spirals that vanish as you shift your gaze. The subtle interplay of light, shadow, and sound feels orchestrated, alive, and conscious.
You leave the deserted marketplace behind, your footsteps echoing faintly as you approach the old inn at the edge of town. Its facade is weathered, paint peeling, and shutters hang crookedly on rusted hinges. The lantern outside flickers weakly, casting pale, dancing light across warped wooden beams. The scent of damp wood and faintly smoked herbs drifts from a half-open doorway. Stepping inside, the atmosphere shifts subtly. Air feels thicker, warmer, carrying faint hints of old fires and dust long settled. Floorboards creak underfoot, some squealing in protest while others groan softly like whispered warnings. Quirky tidbit, medieval inns often had deliberately uneven floorboards to alert owners of unexpected visitors or intruders. Historians still argue whether these architectural quirks were primarily practical or became entwined with local ghost lore. Tonight,
you feel a tangible confluence of all three. You run your fingers along a cracked wooden counter, feeling grooves worn smooth by centuries of hands, merchants, travelers, townsfolk. The faint scent of dried herbs, stale bread, and faded candles clings to the air, an olfactory echo of countless nights past. Shadows stretch across walls and ceilings, cast by lanterns swaying gently in the breeze. A narrow hallway leads deeper into the inn, lined with small rooms whose doors hang slightly ajar. Each doorway frames a different tableau: cracked plaster, splintered beams, faint furniture outlines. Faint whispers drift through the hall, brushing your ears in rhythmic cadence. You strain to hear, catching fragments of words: sleep, observe, remember, but they vanish as soon as they form. Joke number 1 escapes softly. Ah, yes, the inn is offering complimentary ASMR tonight. How thoughtful. Historically, inns served as both lodging and community hubs, where travelers and locals mingled, exchanged news, and sometimes conducted clandestine meetings. Scholars still debate how much inn folklore, ghostly legends, hidden messages, and hauntings was inspired by architecture, practical design, or collective imagination. Tonight, you feel a tangible confluence of all three. You enter a room near the back, its fireplace cold and empty. The mantel is lined with faded trinkets, metal cups, carved figurines, and small bottles of herbs. Lantern light casts jagged shadows across the walls, forming shapes that twist and elongate. You step closer, running your fingers over a carved figure of a small bird, noticing subtle grooves left by someone's hand centuries ago. A sudden creak above makes you glance up. The upper floor groans softly, echoing across the hall. You imagine travelers long ago climbing these stairs, hauling luggage and exchanging whispered secrets. Quirky fact, some inns were rumored to leave secret messages in rooms for returning guests, hidden in carvings, behind panels, or under floorboards. Historians still argue how widespread or intentional these practices were. You walk further down the corridor, eyes tracing faded patterns on the wallpaper, once vibrant, now muted with age. Shadows pool in corners, forming abstract shapes that seem almost alive. Each step, each breath, each creak of the floorboards blends into the inn's quiet nocturnal symphony. The interplay of light, sound, and scent creates a subtle orchestration that guides your awareness through the space. You pause before a door slightly ajar, noticing a faint glimmer from inside. The room beyond holds a small, cracked window through which moonlight spills unevenly, illuminating scattered remnants: a wooden chair tipped over, a bed frame stripped bare, and a hearth dark and cold. Faint whispers brush against your ears again, fragments like, observe, heed, remember. You inhale slowly, letting the sensory mosaic settle around you. Joke number 2 drifts softly. Of course, nothing says cozy lodging like centuries of forgotten whispers. You smile, aware that humor keeps you grounded in the inn's eerie ambiance. You move to the hearth, brushing your fingers along the blackened stone. Faint traces of soot linger, suggesting countless fires once burned here, offering warmth and light to weary travelers. The scent of smoke mingles subtly with the faint herbaceous aroma carried through the corridors. Shadows flicker across the walls in gentle rhythms, elongating and contracting as if breathing. A staircase at the end of a hallway beckons, its steps creaking softly underfoot. You ascend, noting the intricate carvings along the banister, worn smooth by centuries of hands. Each step amplifies faint echoes, merging with distant whispers and subtle creaks from the floorboards. Quirky historical note, some inn staircases were intentionally uneven to alert owners of movement or to slow travelers carrying heavy loads. Scholars still argue how widespread or intentional these practices were. You walk further down the corridor, eyes tracing faded patterns on the wallpaper, now muted with age. Shadows pool in corners, forming abstract shapes that seem almost alive. Each step, each breath, each creak of the floorboards blends into the inn's quiet nocturnal symphony. The interplay of light, sound, and scent creates a subtle orchestration that guides your awareness through the space. You pause before a door slightly ajar, noticing a faint glimmer from inside. The room beyond holds a small, cracked window through which moonlight spills unevenly, illuminating scattered remnants: a wooden chair tipped over, a bed frame stripped bare, and a hearth dark and cold. Faint whispers brush against your ears again, fragments like, step lightly, observe, follow. You step forward slowly, absorbing the sensory tapestry around you. Every creak, flicker, and shadow seems intentional, guiding your journey through the inn's centuries-old memory. Historically, inns served as repositories of local history, with each room, hearth, and corridor holding echoes of conversations, deals, and gossip. Scholars still debate whether lingering auditory and visual phenomena were purely accidental or culturally reinforced through storytelling. You feel the weight of both interpretations as you move deeper into the inn. You enter another room, noticing faint remnants of wallpaper decorated with intricate patterns, now faded and peeling. The floorboards groan as you step inside. Lantern light filters in from the hallway, casting long, abstract shadows that twist across the walls. The air carries a faint scent of burned wood and herbs, subtly mixed with dust and decay. Joke number 3 escapes softly. Ah yes, the medieval Airbnb experience. No check-in, no check-out, just centuries of ambiance. You smile, allowing humor to anchor you while your senses explore the details of the space. The room feels alive with subtle movement, shadows stretching, flickering, and merging into patterns that form almost recognizable shapes. You lean closer to a cracked window, peering out at the deserted street below. The inn seems suspended in time, a nexus where history, memory, and imagination converge. Quirky tidbit, in some towns, innkeepers were rumored to leave secret messages for travelers, carved into wood or hidden under floorboards. Scholars still argue how common or deliberate these practices were. Tonight, the faint traces in the corridors and rooms give a tangible sense of these whispered traditions. You step back into the hallway, noticing how each room contributes to a symphony of subtle sounds, creaking floors, faint whispers, and soft drafts moving through cracked shutters. Shadows stretch and contract, forming shapes that seem alive. Guiding your passage, the inn itself seems aware of your presence, orchestrating your movement through centuries of memory and sensory detail.
You continue down the upstairs hallway, your hand brushing lightly against the rough plaster walls. Tiny flakes crumble beneath your fingertips, falling softly like powdered snow. The corridor seems to stretch longer than it should, its proportions subtly skewed, as though time itself has warped the architecture. You glance back, noticing that the staircase you climbed seems farther away now, swallowed by shadow. Your footsteps echo faintly, each creak of the floorboards adding another note to the inn's nocturnal chorus. Somewhere, wood shifts like an old man turning in his sleep. A faint scent of dried lavender drifts through the air, incongruous yet soothing, as if someone once placed sachets here to mask the smell of damp wood and smoke. You breathe it in, letting the herb's calming properties mingle with the eerie ambiance. At the far end of the hallway, you find a door painted once in vibrant red, now faded into a murky brown. It hangs ajar. You nudge it open, hinges squealing in long protest. The room beyond reveals a bed frame stripped of its mattress, a chair with one leg broken, and a small trunk shoved against the far wall. You step inside, lantern glow illuminating faint writing etched into the wooden beams above the hearth. The letters are crude, but recognizable. Initials entwined with dates, symbols, and short phrases. Perhaps travelers once marked their presence here, leaving a breadcrumb trail of identity across the centuries. Some are scratched so faintly they almost vanish into the wood. Others are carved deep, as though with desperation. Quirky tidbit, some historians believe inn graffiti served as a primitive guest book, a way for travelers to connect across time. Others argue these marks were simple acts of boredom or rebellion. Either way, the echoes remain, etched into the wood like whispers preserved for eternity. You kneel by the trunk, its iron clasps rusted shut. With a soft tug, one clasp snaps, releasing a puff of dust. The lid creaks open to reveal only fragments, scraps of paper, a shoe sole, and a brittle ribbon. The paper crumbles when touched, illegible, yet potent in its silent message. Someone once cared enough to store it here. The faint smell of old ink mingles with dust,
a reminder that every object carries a trace of its maker. Joke number 4 slips softly, so much for hidden treasure, unless of course you collect antique shoelaces. You rise, brushing off your hands, and glance toward the window. Moonlight filters in, highlighting motes of dust that swirl lazily like microscopic constellations. You exhale, watching the particles scatter in gentle response. Tiny galaxies shifting within this small, forgotten room. Stepping back into the hallway, you notice the whispers again, clearer now. They rise and fall in gentle cadence, as though carried on invisible currents of air. The words are still fragmented. Listen, follow, remember. You pause, head tilted, straining to catch more. The whispers stop abruptly, leaving a silence thicker than before. The silence presses against your ears, so dense it feels almost tangible. You hold your breath, attuning yourself to the faintest sounds, the tick of settling wood, the sigh of wind against shutters, the soft scrape of your sleeve against the wall. Every detail feels amplified in the absence of voices. Further down the hallway, a door stands closed. Unlike the others, this one bears a brass handle polished smooth by countless hands. You turn it slowly. The door opens with surprising ease, revealing a room slightly more intact than the rest. Inside, a hearth is filled with cold ash, yet faint traces of warmth linger in the air. The scent of smoke clings faintly to the stones, mixing with the sweetness of lavender. On a shelf above the fireplace sit 3 objects: a cracked ceramic mug, a metal spoon tarnished black, and a small pouch tied with frayed string. You untie the pouch carefully. Inside are dried petals, brittle and darkened with age, perhaps once roses, now reduced to scentless fragments. You bring them close, inhaling faint traces of sweetness that linger stubbornly. The sensory memory of their bloom clings stubbornly to your imagination. Quirky fact: some innkeepers were known to leave small tokens, flowers, herbs, or charms for guests, believed to bring luck or ward off evil. Whether this pouch was one such offering or a personal keepsake, it feels weighted with quiet significance. You set it back gently and sit in the wooden chair, its joints creaking in protest. Closing your eyes, you allow the ambiance of the room to wash over you. The lingering warmth, the faint herbal fragrance, the subtle flicker of lantern light. Shadows stretch and contract on the walls like living silhouettes, reshaping themselves in rhythm with your breathing. A sudden sound startles you, the faint thump of footsteps overhead. You glance upward. The ceiling groans softly, as though someone walks slowly across it. But you know the upper level of the inn has long since collapsed, open to the night sky. The contradiction deepens the mystery. Joke number 5 slips softly. Well, either the ghosts are pacing, or the raccoons have really mastered suspense. You rise, curiosity piqued, and step back into the hallway. The air feels thicker now, tinged with both smoke and dampness. You trace the banister as you descend the staircase, its carving smoother under your palm now, as though invisible hands accompany you. At the base of the stairs, you pause. The main hall feels different, quieter, more attentive. Lantern light reveals faint chalk markings on the floor near the hearth. Circles, crosses, spirals, perhaps remnants of games played, or protective symbols scrawled to guard against unseen forces. Historians still argue about such markings. Were they practical amusements, superstitions, or both? Tonight, they feel like faint echoes of ritual. You kneel, tracing one spiral with your fingertip. The groove is faint, yet deliberate, spiraling inward until it vanishes in the center. A hush falls heavier around you. The whispers return faintly. Observe, heed, remember. Their cadence matches the spiral's shape, pulling your awareness inward. You rise slowly, eyes scanning the hall. Shadows gather at the edges, thicker and darker than before. They ripple like curtains in an unseen breeze, pooling in corners, climbing walls. The scent of smoke sharpens briefly, as though a fire has just been extinguished. Your senses heighten, attuned to every subtle cue. The inn feels alive, not in the biological sense, but as a living repository of memory. Every floorboard, beam, and stone seem to hum with echoes of the past, vibrations carrying whispers across centuries. Quirky historical note, folklore often described inns as liminal spaces, halfway houses, not just between towns, but between worlds. Travelers carried stories, news, and energies through them, leaving fragments behind. Scholars debate whether the haunted inn is more cultural metaphor than literal occurrence. Yet tonight, standing in the silence, you feel how both interpretations can coexist. You move toward the back door, noticing faint carvings in the wood, shapes of animals, stars, and abstract figures. Some appear playful, others ominous. You trace one, shaped like a bird with wings outstretched. The wood feels warmer beneath your touch, vibrating faintly, as though acknowledging your presence. You push the door open, stepping into a narrow courtyard. The night air is crisp, carrying scents of damp earth and faint wood smoke. The courtyard is enclosed by leaning walls, their plaster cracked and ivy creeping upward. The moon hangs overhead, casting pale light that pools across cobblestones. In the center stands a well, its stones slick with moss. You approach, peering into its depths. Moonlight glimmers faintly off stagnant water far below. For a moment, you imagine reflections, faces from centuries past, staring upward from the depths. You blink, and the water lies still, silent and unbroken. Joke number 6 drifts lightly. Note to self, do not request room service from the bottomless well. You linger in the courtyard, breathing deeply. The inn sounds, creaking beams, whispers, footsteps, muffle here, replaced by the gentle chirp of insects and a distant.
The air grows heavier as you step away from the inn and into another corner of the sleepy town. You follow a winding lane lined with crooked walls until the cobblestones open into a courtyard so wide it feels almost bare. In its center looms a long, rectangular building with windows like hollow eyes. Its roof sags, tiles missing, and a wooden sign dangles precariously above the entrance. You can just make out the faded word, hospital. Not the sterile, humming hospitals you know today, with beeping machines and vending machines that never give back the right change. This place belongs to another era, one where healthcare meant bloodletting, herbal compresses, and prayers whispered more for comfort than cure. You can almost picture the queue of villagers outside centuries ago, each clutching a wound, a fever, or a fear, waiting for whatever hope could be offered inside. You step closer, the door groaning wide as if it has been waiting for you. A musty wave of air rolls out, herbs long dried, dust, and a metallic tang that makes you think of iron kettles or, more unsettlingly, dried blood. You cross the threshold, lantern raised. Rows of wooden cots stretch across the hall, some still intact, others splintered into skeletal frames. Straw mattresses crumble into dust at your touch, and you notice faint stains that time never scrubbed away. The sight makes you shiver. Imagine lying there, feverish and shrouded in blankets, while a physician applied leeches to your arms. Mainstream fact slides into place. Medieval hospitals were often less about curing illness and more about shelter, offering the sick a bed, food, and prayer rather than real medicine. The concept of germs wouldn't come until centuries later.
You glance around, half expecting to see a nun or orderly bustling past, murmuring blessings in Latin. You tread carefully down the central aisle. The silence here is profound, deeper even than the inn's corridors. Yet silence in a hospital feels heavier, as if layered with all the groans, coughs, and whispered goodbyes it once absorbed. You hear your own breathing louder than usual, and it unsettles you. Quirky tidbit slides into place. Some hospitals kept healing gardens, where patients could stroll among herbs and flowers, believing fresh air and nature sped recovery. Imagine being prescribed 3 laps around the lavender patch instead of antibiotics. Not a bad deal, unless it's raining. You pause at one cot where the wooden headboard is carved with symbols, crosses, circles, and something resembling a crude sun. Was it graffiti, a desperate prayer, or the idle doodle of a bored patient? Historians still argue whether such markings were spiritual wards or just distractions from pain. Either way, the symbols feel charged, vibrating faintly in your imagination, like unfinished conversations. A sudden rustle interrupts your thoughts. You swing your lantern toward the sound. The farthest cot shifts ever so slightly, straw collapsing with a sigh. No breeze follows, no rats skitter, just silence again. Your skin prickles. You tell yourself it's the wood settling. Still, you don't check under the bed. No one in their right mind checks under the bed. Joke number 1 for this section drifts in like a whisper. Rule number 1 of creepy hospitals: never look under the beds. Rule number 2, seriously, don't. You move onward, finding a side chamber. Inside, shelves sag with dusty jars. You lift one carefully. Inside are desiccated herbs, their labels faded. Another holds what appears to be dried leeches, curled like ink-black commas. You set it down with a grimace, muttering that punctuation should never come in wriggling form. In the corner sits a small altar, candles melted into hardened rivers of wax. The statue above is chipped, a saint with half a face missing. You bow your head slightly out of habit, though the hollow gaze unsettles you more than comforts. Faith here feels less like sanctuary, more like surrender. Historians still argue whether these wards brought solace or despair. To some they were havens, a bed, a prayer, a moment of dignity. To others they were places of waiting, not healing, where hope stretched thinner with every candle that burned down. Tonight, standing here, the debate doesn't feel abstract. It feels heavy, pressed into the dust beneath your feet. A draft slithers through the hall, flickering your lantern. Shadows sway across the walls, elongating into shapes that resemble attendants moving silently, their forms dissolving as quickly as they appear. You wonder if the building itself remembers its caretakers, replaying their routines like a scratched vinyl, looping the same ghostly track. You find yourself drawn toward the far end of the ward. There, behind a warped wooden partition, lies a small room. You push the partition aside and discover a desk, papers scattered across it. Most are illegible, ink blurred by time, but one catches your eye, a list of names. Next to each, a brief note. Fever, lung, wound. A few simply read, gone. You sit in the chair, running your finger down the list. These were real people, each reduced to a single word. You feel the unfairness of it pressing at you, that centuries later their suffering is condensed into smudged ink. And yet here they are, still being read, still being remembered by someone who wasn't even born when they took their last breath. Joke 2 slips in like a sigh. Well, congratulations, you've officially signed in to the creepiest guest book imaginable. The lantern light grows warmer as you lean back, staring at the beams above. Cracks run through the ceiling like veins, and through them you glimpse faint stars. You think of the patients who once lay here, gazing up at the same stars, maybe wishing wishes they never expected to come true. The thought soothes and unsettles you at once.
You step back into the night air, relieved to leave the hospital's silence behind, only to discover the town has its own ways of reminding you that silence never truly lasts. The lane curves, and ahead rises a squat stone tower with a belfry.
Its outline cuts sharp against the moon, and for a moment you swear the structure leans, like it's bowing just slightly toward you. You slow your steps. A bell tower is never just stone and metal. It's rhythm, order, the heartbeat of a town. People once synchronized their lives to its tolls. Work began at dawn's chime, meals at noon, curfew at dusk, prayers at evening. But here, in this sleepy town, the bell rings differently. Or rather, it rings when it shouldn't. You pause at the base of the tower, tilting your head. The bell above stirs faintly, though no rope sways below. The sound that trickles down is low, drawn out, not loud enough to summon villagers, just enough to slip under your skin like a warning. One. Pause. Another. Pause. Each note feels too slow, as though measured by someone who isn't quite following human time. Historians still argue whether unexplained bell tolls in empty towns were caused by shifting wood beams, by wind, or by sheer superstition. Some insist the vibrations came from underground tremors. Others point to the human need to hear patterns in silence. Tonight, none of that comforts you. The tone is too deliberate, too aware, like someone unseen is counting. You circle the tower, brushing your hand across its rough surface. Lichen clings in patches, cool and damp, releasing a faint earthy scent. At the rear, you find a narrow door, slightly ajar. The gap yawns black. Lantern light barely pierces it, but curiosity does what it always does. It tugs you forward. Inside, the stairwell coils tightly, stone steps spiraling upward. Each footfall you make echoes twice, once as a normal thud, once as a fainter, delayed tap that feels like an imitation. You pause mid-step. The second sound doesn't stop. It climbs after you, steady, patient. Joke number 1 for this section sneaks in. Great, either there's a polite ghost following me, or my echo just developed free will. You keep climbing. The air grows colder, sharper. Your breath fogs faintly, visible in the lantern glow. You run your fingers along the inner wall, tracing grooves worn by countless hands. Imagine centuries of villagers climbing this same spiral, priests pulling the rope, children sneaking up for a dare, watchmen peering out for fires. Their palms left these marks, their stories carved invisibly into the stone. Halfway up, you stop to catch your breath. The silence above presses heavy, broken only by that faint metallic hum of the bell waiting. From here you can hear the town's other sounds more clearly. The occasional bark of a dog, the flutter of wings, the distant creak of shutters. Yet underneath it all, the bell thrums softly, resonating through your ribs like an extra heartbeat. You resume climbing. The stairwell narrows until your shoulders almost scrape both walls. Dust coats your tongue. The lantern sputters, threatening to die, but catches again. When you finally emerge into the belfry, the view steals your breath. The town stretches beneath you like a patchwork quilt of roofs, chimneys, and silent streets, all bathed in moonlight. Beyond lie rolling hills, forests black against the horizon, and further still, a faint glimmer of river. The air up here feels sharper, tinged with smoke and cold stone. You turn to the bell. It hangs massive in its timber frame, bronze gone green with age. Its surface is mottled, streaked where centuries of rain have run down. Strange marks mar its sides, not quite scratches, not quite carvings. Some resemble letters, others are indecipherable. You brush your fingers across one and the metal vibrates faintly, humming like a low voice. Quirky tidbit. Some bells were believed to absorb voices. Villagers thought every toll stored prayers, cries, and secrets in the metal itself. When the bell rang, those echoes spilled back out. Standing here, you can almost believe it. The faint hum feels less like metal and more like murmurs trapped too long. You glance at the clapper, hanging motionless in the center. The bell sways slightly, though no wind stirs, and you realize the sound earlier wasn't imagination. It really did toll without touch. You lean in, eyes narrowing, and notice something unsettling. Faint fingerprints streak the green patina. Not yours, not centuries old, fresh. You step back, pulse quickening. The lantern light trembles, shadows stretching long. The air grows heavier,
like the pause before thunder. The bell shifts, ever so slightly, and then without warning, it tolls again. The sound bursts out, low and resonant, vibrating through your chest, rattling the wood, spilling into the town below. Joke number 2 arrives shaky but determined. Great, nothing says bedtime lullaby like a death bell solo. The tone lingers impossibly long, filling the air. Down below, the town responds. A shutter bangs open, somewhere a dog howls. You swear you hear faint footsteps scattering across cobblestones. The bell tolls once more, slower, heavier. The tower seems to exhale with each note. You clutch the railing, steadying yourself. Your eyes drift outwards again to the streets beneath. In the moonlight, you see movement, figures drifting slowly across the square. They're too far to identify clearly, but their gait is strange, deliberate, as though they're marching to the rhythm of the tolls. You squint, heart pounding. The figures pause whenever the bell falls silent. When it tolls again, they resume, their synchronization too eerie to dismiss as coincidence. You look back at the bell, back at the figures, then at your own trembling hands. Historians still argue whether stories of midnight processions tied to bells are folklore or rooted in some forgotten ritual. Were bells signals to the living or invitations to the dead? Standing here, it feels less like debate and more like demonstration. Your lantern flickers, threatening to die. You shield it, eyes darting back to the shadows below. The figures have vanished as quickly as they appeared. Only the echo of the bell remains vibrating faintly inside your chest, long after the sound fades. The silence that follows feels wrong, too abrupt, too total. You realize your own breath is the loudest sound left, and even that seems to echo unnaturally.
The council chamber of Horrifying stood like a cathedral of power, its ceiling lost in shadows and its walls lined with banners of dynasties long dead. Each obsidian chair carved along the crescent table was filled tonight, and the air buzzed with unease, as though the very stones new decisions made here could topple empires. At the center of the crescent sat High Chancellor Verid, his silver hair bound tightly with threads of sapphire, his face a mask of calm authority. He raised a jeweled hand, and the murmuring died. His voice rolled out smooth, measured, yet sharp enough to cut glass. Citizens whisper of a man who dares to edit the very fabric of who we are. They call him the memory alchemist. With his craft, grief is dissolved, betrayal erased, guilt unstitched from the soul. A comforting lie, perhaps, but do you not see? A people without memory is a people without caution. Without scars, they will stumble blindly into the same traps. This alchemy is not salvation. It is poison disguised as honey. The chamber erupted in murmurs and nervous shifting. Some nodded, grim and fearful. Others glanced to one another, eyes calculating, wondering what profit could be gained. From the far side of the chamber, a slender figure in emerald silks rose, Lady Celiora, her youth radiant but her gaze steel. Her voice carried across the hall with surprising strength. "Chancellor, forgive me, but Horrifying has always lived by forgetting. We bury our dead rebellions under new banners. We burn old laws when they no longer serve the powerful. What difference does it make if one man gives us the gift to do what this city has practiced for centuries, only more perfectly?" A ripple ran through the council. Applause broke from some corners, outrage from others. Verid's lips curved in a thin smile that did not reach his eyes. A spy in the shadows. Among the servants gliding through the chamber with trays of wine was a woman draped in plain cloth, her face hidden beneath a hood. None noticed her careful steps, nor the way her gaze lingered on each counselor as though weighing their value. This was Kalev, shadowbinder and loyal confidant of Chiron himself. Every word, every vote cast here tonight would find its way back to the alchemist before dawn. Yet, as she slipped along the walls, a flicker of unease pricked her senses,
Across the chamber, another servant lingered too long, his cloak of ash gray too heavy for the season, his eyes locked with hers for a breath, a rival spy, predatory, promising blood when the time was right. Calais's fingers brushed the dagger hidden in her sleeve, but she stilled. Patience, watch, survive. The vote. The debate stretched until the chamber was heavy with smoke from torches and tired tempers. Finally, Chancellor Verid rose once more, his voice low and decisive. "We will put it to vote. Shall memory alchemy be branded a crime of treason, punishable by exile or death?" Gasps filled the room. This was no minor decree. This was a death sentence for the alchemist and any who sheltered him. One by one, counselors pressed their rings into hot wax, the tally taken in silence that seemed to last an eternity. 7 for prohibition, 6 against, 1 abstained. The decree would pass. But as Verid drew breath to announce the verdict, a sudden movement split the chamber. The ash-gray spy had risen. A dagger flashed, slicing through torchlight, aimed straight for Lady Celiora's throat. The intervention. Gasps, shouts, too late to stop the blade, but shadows writhed across the floor, unnatural, alive. Calais's hand shot forward, her will dragging darkness into form. Black smoke coiled around the dagger mid-flight, strangling its momentum. The blade clattered harmlessly against the stone tiles, the sound echoing like a drumbeat in the stunned silence. All eyes turned. But Calais was gone, already melted into the chaos, her hood vanishing among the frightened servants. Only the fallen dagger remained, proof that someone had intervened. Celiora stood frozen, a hand pressed to her throat, her eyes wide. She knew. Someone had saved her, and that someone was not of the council. Return to the atelier. The workshop smelled of ink, smoke, and old dreams. Chiron stood before the crucible, glass vials of memories glowing like captured stars. He did not turn when Calais slipped inside. They voted. Treason. Soldiers will come. They also tried to silence Celiora. Finally, the alchemist looked up. His face was weary, yet his eyes burned with something deeper. Resolve or madness, it was hard to tell. Good. Let them ban my work. A forbidden art is far more tempting than a permitted one. And Celiora, she has declared herself with blood nearly spilled. She will not be left to die alone. He touched the crucible, and the swirling fragments of stolen lives shimmered against his palm. The council thinks their decrees shape or vain, but his voice dropped to a whisper, I write in memory itself. And memory is stronger than law.
Orvain did not sleep easily after the council's decree. In the crooked alleys beneath the marble plazas, whispers grew like mold. The memory alchemist was no longer just a rumor. He was a myth, a phantom, a hope. For every citizen who trembled at the thought of treason, there were 3 more who yearned for the touch of his crucible. A widow who could no longer endure the sight of her husband's empty chair. A soldier whose hands shook at night, still stained in dreams by the blood of war. A merchant whose son had drowned, the echo of screams replaying in endless loop. They gathered quietly, at first in 2s and 3s, then in crowds that filled forgotten shrines. They lit no candles, they carved no symbols. They simply sat in silence, each clutching a shard of memory they wished erased. And when the silence grew unbearable, they began to chant, not Chiron's name, but a word older than the city, whispered like a key. Rememora. Celiora's awakening. Lady Celiora's chambers overlooked the river Thale, its waters black as onyx under moonlight. Since the assassination attempt, she had not slept more than an hour at a time. The dagger's glint haunted her eyelids. Her maids begged her to stay indoors, but she found herself walking the riverbanks at night, veiled and alone. Each time she passed clusters of people kneeling in the dark, their faces hollow,
their voices low with that same strange word. Rememora, rememora. At first, she dismissed it as grief's madness. Yet one evening, a young boy tugged at her sleeve, eyes raw with tears. "Lady, they say you were saved by shadows. Is it true? Can you bring us to him? To the one who takes away the pain?" Celiora froze. In that moment, she understood her survival in the chamber had made her more than a counselor. She was now a symbol, a bridge between the broken and the alchemist. Cults in the catacombs. Beneath Horrifying stretched a labyrinth of catacombs where bones had been laid for centuries. Once a year, priests carried torches there to bless the dead. Now the halls echoed nightly with footsteps that were not holy. Hooded figures filled the tunnels, trading tokens of memory. A lock of hair, a blood-stained glove, a faded letter. These objects were pressed into the hands of shadowy intermediaries, men and women loyal to Chiron, though none ever named him aloud. Instead, they knelt before empty stone niches and begged the silence to swallow their grief. And sometimes, when the air grew unnaturally cold and the walls shivered with unseen power, the pain truly faded. Not gone, but buried. Historians still argue whether these cults were the invention of desperate citizens, or whether Chiron himself encouraged them as a smokescreen to hide his movements. But to the people living it, there was no question. The alchemist was answering. Callie's warning. Callie watched all of this unfold with unease. She returned from the catacombs one night, her cloak heavy with candle smoke, and confronted Chiron in his workshop. "You don't control this anymore," she whispered. "What began as craft is now worship. They don't just want your gift, they want you. And crowds that worship can turn on their gods just as quickly." Chiron only smiled faintly, though his eyes betrayed exhaustion. "Let them chant. Let them gather. Pain is the oldest currency. I am simply minting it into something new. Do not fear their worship, Callie. Fear their silence, because silence means they've stopped believing." But as he turned back to the crucible, shadows trembling against the glass, even Callie wondered if belief could be more dangerous than betrayal. A city divided. Within weeks, Horrifying became two cities living uneasily on top of one another. Above, the council tightened laws, patrolling streets with lanterns, seizing any caught in the act of memory exchange. Executions were promised. Loyalty was demanded. Below, in crypts and taverns, the forgotten cults multiplied. They invented rituals Chiron had never taught, washing one another's faces with wine to cleanse memory, binding their wrists with ash to seal the past. They claimed dreams where the alchemist whispered to them directly. Celiora, torn between her loyalty to the council and her haunting rescue, began attending these vigils in secret. She told herself it was only to understand, only to listen. But she too began to wonder what it might feel like to erase one unbearable thing. The city's heartbeat had split in two, and in the center of that fracture stood Chiron, the memory alchemist, watching his art turn into a faith he never asked for, and perhaps could no longer control.
The Palace of Horrifying had always been a place of echo. Voices traveled strangely here, whispers carried across marble floors, laughter sank into draperies, and secrets clung to the carved wooden beams as though the walls themselves refused to forget. Servants knew this better than anyone. They walked softly, polished silently, and kept their mouths shut. But silence doesn't mean ignorance. If the counselors believed their plots vanished into velvet curtains, they underestimated the power of ears bent in shadow. The Hall of Murmurs. Among the palace staff, there was a hallway known only by a secret name, the Hall of Murmurs. It was narrow, lined with portraits of past rulers whose painted eyes seemed to follow intruders. Behind its stone, vents and cracks carried conversations from chambers above. Here, scullery boys and laundry girls lingered when they could, straining to catch fragments. The alchemist grows stronger. Celiora attends the vigils herself. 7 towns erased, but maps remain blank. Towns erased, that phrase alone was enough to turn spines cold. The vanished settlements. Long before Chiron's crucible, there had been stories of villages near the northern frontier that simply disappeared. Whole hamlets, fields left tilled but empty, wells still brimming with water, food left half-eaten on tables. Some said plague, others war, but those who dared travel there swore the air itself felt absent, as if memory had been pulled from the soil. Even animals shied away. Now, as the alchemist's art spread, servants whispered that those vanishings were no accident at all. That perhaps Orvain's ruling houses had used a primitive form of the same alchemy to erase mistakes, rebellions, massacres, inconvenient histories. Historians still argue whether these stories were born of paranoia, or whether they marked the first experiments of a forgotten predecessor, but in the palace kitchens, no one doubted. Era's secret. One servant, a young woman named Era, had sharper ears than most. She worked in the laundry, scrubbing robes until her fingers bled, but her true trade was gathering secrets like lint. It was Era who first whispered to her fellow workers that Celiora had nearly been killed in the chamber, and that shadows, not steel, had saved her. It was Era who hinted that maps of vanished towns were locked in Vered's private study, and it was Era who swore she had once heard the Chancellor mutter to himself in the dead of night, "What is a city but a memory drawn in stone?" To the servants, Era became their storyteller, their scribe of fear. They believed every word she repeated, and in believing, they kept the legend alive. The weight of listening. Of course, servants lived under constant danger. Being caught listening was punishable by the lash, or worse, banishment to the very borderlands where vanished towns lay. So they spoke carefully, over the chopping of onions, beneath the splash of laundry, while sweeping the council chambers, heads bent low. Secrets became part of the rhythm of their lives, traded like currency. And slowly, ever so quietly, they began to form patterns. Towns that disappeared were always near rivers. Council decrees that vanished from archives were always tied to memory disputes. And every time, the alchemist's shadow seemed to fall over the story, whether or not he had truly been involved. The walls leaned closer. Late at night, when the torches guttered and the palace settled into uneasy silence, Era sometimes swore she heard the walls themselves speaking back, not with words, but with sighs like voices trapped too long in stone. She told herself it was imagination, but one evening, as she pressed her ear against the paneling near the Hall of Murmurs, she heard something no human throat could have uttered. It was a memory, someone crying out for help, then fading not into silence, but into nothingness. She pulled away, trembling. Perhaps the walls of Orvain did not merely echo. Perhaps they remembered. And Celiora returned. And then, one night, Celiora herself returned to the Hall of Murmurs, not as rumor, but in flesh and blood. Era was sweeping when the lady appeared, cloaked and veiled, her eyes darting like a thief's. "Child," she whispered, "what do you hear in these walls?" Era wanted to lie, she wanted to bow and retreat. But instead, trembling, she confessed what she'd heard, the towns, the cries, the maps that must exist somewhere. Celiora did not scold her. She only placed a hand on her shoulder and said softly, "Then we will listen together, because history's first truth is always whispered long before it's written." The servant and the counselor, bound now by secrets the walls themselves seemed eager to share. And in that bond, the fragile thread of resistance against Orvain's forgetting began to tighten.
The streets of Orvain always smell faintly of tallow, Even with incense burning in the temples, even with bread steaming in the markets, the wax clung stubbornly to the air. A reminder that light was not free. It was carved from flesh and flame. At the age of the poorer quarter, tucked between a shuttered apothecary and a silent cobbler's shop, stood a crooked little house whose windows glowed long into the night. Inside, hunched over a scarred wooden bench, worked Marek the candlemaker. The keeper of sorrows. Marek's hands were thick, calloused, coated in pale dust from years of molding wax. Every curve of his palms told stories of burns, of dripped wax, of hours bent over flame. But his true craft was not candles, it was memory. For years villagers came to him not just to buy light, but to whisper their griefs into his ear. Wives whose husbands had vanished on distant battlefields, children who could not sleep for nightmares, old men haunted by faces of friends they betrayed in youth. Marek would listen, silent, nodding, and then hand over a candle, always the right size, always burning exactly as long as the sorrow lasted. People said his wicks were woven with sympathy. Others claimed he had once studied with healers, or worse, with alchemists. Historians still argue whether candlemakers like Marek were ordinary tradesmen or secret intermediaries for forbidden arts. But in Orvain's alleys, no one doubted that his candles knew more than they should. Candles of the dead. One corner of his shop was filled with strange commissions. Short, stubby tapers requested for graves, thin black candles burned for lovers who never returned, and most curious of all, hollow candles, wax shells with nothing inside. When asked, Marek would only shrug and mutter, "Some grief burns inward. It doesn't want light, only darkness." Those who bought hollow candles never returned to complain. They simply disappeared into silence, as though the wax had devoured their voices. A visit from Celiora. One rain-soaked evening, Lady Celiora herself stepped into Marek's shop, her cloak dripping, her veil lowered. The air trembled as villagers bowed, stunned to see a counselor in such a place. Marek did not bow. He only raised a bushy brow. "You have come for a candle, my lady. Offer something else." Celiora hesitated. Then softly, "For forgetting." The shop seemed to still. Even the flames in the window wavered. Marek studied her face, his eyes both tired and sharp. "You have spoken to the walls. You have seen shadows save you. Why come to me when the alchemist himself bends memory?" "Because," Celiora whispered, "his gift frightens me, but your candles, they comfort." The candlemaker's confession. That night, Marek did something he had never done before. He led Celiora into the back room, where hundreds of unlit candles stood stacked like sentinels. Each was edged with faint scratches, names, dates, fragments of words. "These," Marek murmured, "are the griefs no one dares to burn. They come to me, they whisper, but at the last moment, they cannot let go. So I keep them here, waiting. Do you hear them?" Celiora strained her ears, and at first she heard nothing. But slowly, faint as moth wings, whispers thread the air, 1,000 small voices murmuring their unfinished stories. She shivered. "You're drowning in sorrow." Marek smiled sadly, his teeth like worn ivory. "Yes, and one day, when I'm gone, perhaps all these unlit candles will burn together and the city will finally see itself in flame." A candle for the alchemist. Before she left, Celiora asked one last question. "Have you ever met him, the memory alchemist?" Marek's hands paused over the wax, his eyes clouded with something between fear and longing. "Once, long ago, before he was legend, he asked me for a candle that would never go out. I told him such a thing would curse the world. He only smiled." Marek pressed a small candle into a hand, pale blue wax flecked with gold. "This is not for forgetting. This is for remembering when memory feels too heavy. Light it, and you will carry sorrow with warmth instead of weight. That is my craft, not erasure, but gentleness." Celiora left the shop with the candle hidden in her cloak, her heart torn. For the first time she wondered. Perhaps the truest resistance to the alchemist was not in laws or decrees, but in small acts of kindness like Marek's. And behind her, in the dim glow of his workshop, the candlemaker sat alone, surrounded by whispers that would never burn, his own private ocean of sorrow.
The silence inside the cavernous library was unlike any other silence Li Wei had ever known. It wasn't the soft hush of a monastery, nor the reverent quiet of a temple. This was heavier, thicker, as if the air itself had been pressed down by centuries of forgotten words and the ghosts of readers who never left. The Phantom Archive, so named in fearful whispers among the people of the eastern provinces, was said to be alive. The walls were not mere stone, but parchment bound in living veins, pulsing faintly if one stared too long. The shelves towered upward in impossible spirals, curving into a darkness that no torchlight dared to penetrate. Li Wei ran his fingers along the nearest scroll, its surface slick with a strange dew. The ink moved under his touch, rearranging itself like an animal shifting in its sleep. May clutched her satchel tighter, her eyes darting. "Why does it feel like the books are watching us?" she whispered. "They are," murmured the keeper. His figure, draped in robes of gray mist, barely cast a shadow, though he stood right beside them. His eyes glowed faintly, not with fire, but with the light of reflection, like two moons caught in an eternal eclipse. The archive remembers everyone who enters. Some it permits to leave, others it keeps. The group exchanged nervous glances. Even Lin, who had faced storms and raiders without flinching, looked unsettled here. Li Wei stepped forward. "We seek the Chronicle of the Silent Emperor. They say it rests here." The keeper's mouth twitched into something between a smile and a grimace. "They say many things. Few survive to repeat them." Suddenly the shelves trembled. Scrolls fell open, and the ink within them rose, twisting into shapes. Shadows spilled across the floor, lengthening like claws. One of them hissed, and the hiss carried words, ancient syllables that scraped the ears. Shen drew his blade, but the keeper lifted a hand. "Steel is useless here. You fight them with memory, not with metal." Before Shen could protest, one of the ink shadows lunged at May. She stumbled backward, barely holding her torch aloft. The flame sputtered, dimming as the shadow wrapped around it. "Think," the keeper commanded. "Of what?" Li Wei shouted. "Of the moment that defines you, the memory you would give everything to keep." Li Wei's heart thundered. He closed his eyes, summoning the image of his mother's face the night she taught him how to carve characters into bamboo. Her hands, steady as the stars. Her smile, faint but proud. The shadow froze. Its form quivered as if it were caught between hunger and recognition. Slowly it retreated, dissolving back into the scroll from which it had emerged. May gasped, clutching Li Wei's arm. It worked! But dozens more shadows began to stir, slithering down the shelves like serpents. The archive was awakening fully now. The keeper's voice echoed in the rising chaos. "To find the chronicle, you must prove that your memories are stronger than its hunger. Walk carefully, and do not, under any circumstances, forget who you are." The group pressed onward, each step deeper into the labyrinth of shelves. The path was shifting beneath them, rewriting itself as if the archive delighted in their confusion. And then, without warning, the shelves opened into a vast atrium. At its center floated a colossal book, suspended in chains of light, its cover shimmering with golden scales. The Chronicle of the Silent Emperor. But surrounding it were shadows unlike the others, taller, sharper, crowned with jagged horns. Their whispers were not only words, but memories stolen from others who had perished here. Li Wei's blood ran cold. He heard a familiar voice among them, his father's. The archive was not merely alive, it was hungry for the past, and it had already begun to feed.
The atrium pulsed like a heart. Each thrum rattled the shelves, shaking down fragments of parchment that drifted like dying leaves. The colossal book, the Chronicle of the Silent Emperor, hung at the center, suspended in chains of living light. The golden scales across its cover shifted as though it were breathing, each shimmer sending ripples of energy through the chamber. The shadows circled around it like priests at a forbidden altar. Taller, crueler than the ink phantoms before, these wore crowns of jagged horn. Their eyes were pools of black flame, and their voices were not their own. "Li Wei," one hissed, in a tone that mirrored his father's voice. "Mei," another whispered, with her grandmother's gentle lilt. "Lin," crooned a third, perfectly mimicking the voice of a brother he had lost at sea. Each name was spoken with intimate cruelty. Each shadow carried a memory stolen from someone who had entered the archive before, reshaping it into a weapon. May stumbled, clutching her ears. That's my grandmother. She used to sing me lullabies by the river. How could it know?" "It doesn't know," the keeper said grimly. "It steals, it devours. Every soul who lingers here leaves pieces behind. Those pieces become the archive's teeth." One shadow peeled away from the circle, its body stretching like molten tar. It stopped before Shen, reshaping its face into his old commander, the man he had betrayed long ago. "You left me on the field," it growled. Shen's grip on his blade faltered. For the first time, the hardened soldier's hand trembled. Li Wei stepped forward, chest heaving. "We can't fight them with steel. We have to—" "Remember," the keeper cut in. His voice was like thunder rolling through stone. "The stronger your hold on your truest memory, the weaker their grip becomes. Anchor yourselves. Do not let them fracture you." But the archive was relentless. One of the crowned phantoms darted toward Li Wei, its form unraveling into chains of ink that lashed around his arms. He felt his mind dragged backward, images flashing in his head. His father's disappointment, the day he left his village, the hours he wondered if he would ever be enough. "Give it to us," the shadow crooned. "Let go of the burden. Forget. "No," Li Wei roared, forcing his mind to the bamboo grove, to his mother's steady hands guiding his own, to her voice saying, "Your words will outlive your fear." He clung to that memory like a drowning man to driftwood. The chains cracked, splintered with light, and the phantom shrieked, recoiling. Around him, the others were locked in similar battles. May faced the shade of her grandmother, tears streaming as she whispered lullabies back to the phantom until it unraveled. Lin clenched his fists, screaming his brother's name, not in grief, but in defiance, as the shadow dissolved into mist. Shen was faltering. The phantom of his commander pressed harder, voice like acid. "You are a coward, a deserter. History will remember you only as betrayal." Shen's knees buckled. His sword clattered to the stone floor. Li Wei darted toward him, grabbing his arm. "Shen, remember something, anything worth living for." Shen's eyes were hollow, lost in the phantom's grip. But then May stepped forward, her hand on his shoulder. "You saved me," she whispered fiercely. "In the storm, when the mast broke. You pulled me back when the seed tried to claim me. That's who you are, not what it says. Remember that." Shen's breath hitched. Slowly, he met her gaze. The phantom roared, but its form wavered. Shen's memory of saving May burned brighter than his guilt. With a cry, he surged back to his feet, and the phantom shattered into ash. The chamber shook violently. The chains around the chronicle rattled, glowing hotter. The shadows reeled back, their forms fraying at the edges. The keeper spread his arms. "You have done what few have. The chronicle stirs for you. But beware, its chains are not to be broken lightly. If you claim it, it will demand more than memory. It will demand truth." The group stood in the blazing light of the suspended tome. Its scales peeled back slightly, as though an unseen eye were opening within its cover. Li Wei swallowed hard. The silent emperor's chronicle was within reach.
but so, perhaps, was ruin.
The chamber breathes with you. Each inhalation feels heavier, as though the archive itself leans closer to watch. The chains that hold the chronicle glow like veins of molten gold, pulsing faster, brighter, as though sensing your hesitation. The silent emperor's book is no longer just a relic. It feels alive, awake, hungry. The keeper's eyes flash with something between reverence and fear. Be warned, once you touch it, you cannot walk away unchanged. The chronicle does not merely record history, it rewrites it. Yours, mine, every path connected to you. Choose carefully. Your fingers twitch at your side. Every instinct screams to step closer, yet some quiet dread warns you that even a glance at the open pages could mean drowning in stories not your own. Shen breaks the silence first. His voice is rough but steady now. We didn't fight through shadows of our dead for nothing. If this is truth, then I'll face it. Better a painful truth than another lie. The chronicle stirs, as if approving. May frowns. But truth for whom? What if it isn't our story we're forced to carry, but his? She nods toward the etched image on the book's cover, a faint, almost imperceptible silhouette of a man in regal armor, head bowed beneath a crown of knives. The silent emperor himself. Historians still argue, the keeper admits, his voice hushed, whether the chronicle reveals universal truths or only the twisted perspective of its maker. Some say it was a prison for his mind. Others say it was a mirror of the world itself. None survived long enough to settle the debate. Lin tilts his head, unease flickering in his eyes. So, if we open it, we might be trapped in someone else's memories? Or in your own, the keeper counters softly. The chains suddenly crack. Not broken, no, not yet, but loosened. They snap outward like flares, striking the ground with sparks. The shock wave forces you all back a step. And then you hear it. A voice. Not spoken aloud, but unfurling in your skull, slick and insistent. Show me your truth, one by one. Offer me what binds you, or you will remain bound here forever. The air goes cold, sharp enough to sting your lungs. The chronicle waits, silent now, but demanding in its stillness. Shen grips his blade, though it seems foolish here. We don't all have to do this, do we? The keeper shakes his head grimly. No, only those who wish to leave. The rest may turn back, though the archive rarely lets its guests go without a mark. Li Wei feels the pull more than the others. His mind buzzes with fragments of his unfinished manuscript, words left unwritten, dreams of chronicling the forgotten. Perhaps that is why the chronicle calls to him the loudest. You step closer. The golden chains retract slightly, slithering away like serpents. The cover peels back, not entirely, just a sliver, revealing a page glowing with text too fluid to fix your gaze upon. And then the test begins. Li Wei staggers as his vision twists. Suddenly he is back in the bamboo grove of his childhood, his mother's voice behind him, urging him to keep practicing his calligraphy. But over her words, a second voice whispers, "Tell me who you are. Tell me, and I will decide if history deserves you." You glance at the others. Their eyes are glazed, each caught in their own vision. May clutches her chest as though her heart itself is being read out loud. Lin has dropped to his knees, murmuring a prayer to a brother long gone. Shen grips his face, torn between rage and despair. The keeper alone stands unmoved,
his body rigid, those sweat beads along his temple. The chronicle feeds on each of you, demanding. Not lies, not rehearsed stories, but the unvarnished truth, the kind you'd rather bury. You are forced to speak, the words rip out of you unbidden. I am afraid, Li Wei gasps, afraid that my words won't matter, that I'll be forgotten. The page before him glows, burning brighter. The voice hums in satisfaction. Good. Fear is truth. Continue. The others speak too. May sobs as she confesses she never wanted to inherit her family's role as guardian of forgotten lore. Lin whispers that he resents his dead brother for leaving him behind. Shen snarls that part of him enjoyed surviving when his commander did not. Each confession sears the chamber, etching itself into the floating pages. And then the chronicle shudders. The chains snap again, this time breaking, scattering like shards of starlight. The book floats freely, its pages unfurling with a sound like 1,000 wings. The air is thick with power. Histories, millions of them, spill like rivers through your mind. Battles that never happened, kings who never reigned, villages that burned and villages that thrived. Reality itself blurs at the edges. You realize with a chill, the chronicle is not just memory. It is possibility. And it is still hungry.
The chronicle hovers above the stone dais, no longer bound, no longer patient. Its pages fan outward, hundreds, no, thousands, fluttering like restless wings. Each one glows faintly, etched with shifting characters that bleed from one language into another, scripts from dynasties long crumbled, alphabets no human tongue has spoken for centuries. The air hums like a swarm of bees caught in glass. The keeper's face is pale, as though the light itself scours him. "It is open," he whispers, "but it has not chosen yet. It waits for more than confessions. It waits for an anchor." The book tilts slightly, and one page rips free, swirling toward Shin. He flinches, but the parchment stops an inch from his chest, pressing lightly against his heart. And suddenly his truth is not private anymore. The page projects it. Images burst into the chamber like smoke made solid. Shin's battlefield betrayal, the night he fled instead of standing with his commander, the look of shock in his dying leader's eyes. The others are forced to watch. May gasps. Lin grips his fists. Li Wei feels his throat tighten. Shen roars, ashamed. But the chronicle is not cruel. It is honest. The image shifts, showing also the moment Shin dragged Mei from the sea, when no one else could. It does not erase his guilt, but it balances it. The page dissolves into light and returns to the book. Now another page breaks free. It drifts toward Mei. Her body stiffens. Suddenly the room fills with the image of a small girl, clutching scrolls too heavy for her arms. The vision shows Mei before her grandmother's death, when she was told she would inherit the family's sacred task of safeguarding forgotten histories. The burden crushed her, even as she smiled dutifully. Tears rolled down her face in the present. "I never wanted it," she admits again, "but I could not refuse." The chronicle answers by showing her grandmother's smile, proud and tender, as Mei preserved what others ignored. The burden was heavy, but it was not wasted. The light wraps her gently, then the page snaps back to the book. Lin's truth follows, his envy, his grief. The chronicle shows the brother he lost not as an untouchable hero, but as a flawed, laughing boy who teased him mercilessly. Lin drops to his knees, whispering apologies. The chronicle gives no answer, only silence, as if waiting for him to decide what that memory means. Li Wei feels the pull next. He stumbles, and the page sears his vision. Suddenly he sees himself, years in the future, or perhaps only in possibility,
An old man slumped over parchment, his words unread, his life forgotten. The terror of insignificance squeezes his chest. "I don't want to vanish," he says, voice breaking. "I want my words to matter." The chronicle's answer is neither kind nor cruel. It shows a bamboo grove, his mother's hand on his shoulder. "Your words will outlive your fear." The light retracts. The book slams shut. The entire archive shakes, cracks racing along the ceiling like veins of lightning. The shadows that haunted them earlier shrieked, melting back into the stone. The keeper braces himself, cloak whipping in the wind. "It has accepted you," he says, "but its hunger is not sated. It will ask again, always again. History is never full." The chronicle sinks gently to the dais, chains reforming around it, looser now, as though they have recognized the group as part of its story. The keeper's voice softens. "You are the first in generations to withstand it, but beware, now that it has tasted your truths, it will follow you, in dreams, in whispers, in the quiet moments when you write or read. You are bound to it, and it to you." The last of the storm dies down, dust settles, the chamber grows still, the book silent once more. But in the quiet, you swear you can still hear pages turning. And now, it is time to let go. The chronicle rests again, its light dimmed, the chains silent. You and your companions remain in the atrium, but the worst of the storm has passed. The air feels softer, almost forgiving, as though the archive itself exhales after holding its breath for too long. You linger for a moment on each of their faces. Shen, whose guilt did not consume him; Mei, whose burden now feels a little lighter; Lin, who still grieves but carries a sharper clarity; and you, Li Wei, who has stared into the fear of being forgotten and found, if not comfort, then at least courage. The keeper watches in silence, his expression unreadable, though perhaps there is the faintest glimmer of respect in his eyes. He does not thank you, he does not dismiss you. He simply turns his gaze toward the endless shelves, as though listening for the heartbeat of the archive itself. Your own breath slows. The frantic rhythm of your pulse eases into something steady, something calm. The pages, the voices, the demands, they fade, replaced by the steady hum of silence. For the first time since stepping into this hidden city of memories, you feel the weight lifting from your shoulders. Let your mind soften with the image, golden chains dimming, shadows dissolving, the great tome resting in stillness. Imagine the dust settling in lazy spirals, each mote catching the faintest glow of forgotten lantern light. Imagine the cold stone beneath your feet warming, as if touched by dawn. It is time to sleep now. The chronicle will remain here, locked away, whispering in dreams perhaps, but quiet for tonight. So close your eyes, let the hum fade into nothing. Rest easy. You are safe.